the EscapeGoat podcast, a podcast series featuring the discussion of many different topics, flaws and all, based on personal whims and fascinations. Hosted by me, David Fagiani, and several different guests. Hello, welcome to the EscapeGoat podcast, episode 19, and I'd like to welcome my friend John to the podcast. Hello, John.
Hello.
How are you doing today?
I'm very well, thanks, David. How are you?
Yeah, I'm alright actually. Yeah, I've just been for a bit of a walk. Went to the park. I'm in Manchester at the moment, so visiting my mum. So I just, went for a little walk with mum. Saw a horse. Pretty cool. Yeah. Yeah.
That's a good Saturday. That's a good start to a Saturday.
Yeah. I should say we're recording this in the the late 2020 UK lockdown. So thrills are a bit hard to come by at the moment. I think it's fair to say.
Yes, a horse. I saw a horse, and that will do me now until the new year.
Yeah, that'll tide me over. Yeah, quite nice.
That's all the excitement I need. Well, I've A, not been out, and B, definitely not seen a horse, because obviously if I'd seen a horse and not been out, that would that would indicate I'm living with a horse. Which
that would be a revision.
Can confirm, listeners. Do not live with a horse.
Yeah, you heard it here first. It's good that the listeners get to know people that come on the show.
Yeah, absolutely, and that's pretty much all I need to say about myself. I think is my name's John, and I do not live with a horse.
If your bio line for the podcast doesn't just read that, I'll be disappointed. I like that.
But what if I buy a horse between now and then?
Well, don't.
Oh, they're not open, are they? They're not classed as essential services.
Yeah, it's like interviewing Keith Moon or something. I have no idea what you might do in the hours after this podcast that will make it irrelevant. I'd like to, yeah. So I'll get on to the meat of the conversation. So I've invited John on to talk about a mutual passion and sort of interest of ours, which is the Anthology TV show, which has been running since 2014, Inside Number 9, as written and usually performed in part by Steve Pemberton and Reece Shearsmith. I wanted to, because what we're going to do is we're going to talk about Inside Number 9 a bit generally, and then what me and John have decided to do, probably predictably gimmicky, is focus on 9 episodes of Inside Number 9. So John's chosen 4 and I've chosen 4, and then we kind of agreed on one that was kind of, given what we'd chosen, it was the obvious one that we really needed to get in there as well. But before we get into that, I just wanted to talk a little bit about your sort of background with Pemberton and Shearsmith and kind of what they've done over the last the last couple of decades really. But what was your introduction to their work, John?
I mean, it's the same as everyone else's. It's the League of Gentlemen. I was not particularly early to that party. I don't think I never listened to it on the radio. I never saw it when it was in the early days when it was live. But when did it first air? The first series aired in
98, I think. On
98.
Telly.
Goodness, as long ago as that. So I just remember watching that at the time and finding it just completely novel and kind of new and exciting. And it was sort of around the same time, or maybe a bit later actually, but it was around that kind of Mighty Boosh time, not far off it, when lots of kind of exciting comedy stuff seemed to be happening. A lot of new, fresh voices seemed to be coming through. So I think it was that. I didn't fall out of love with, but I don't think I went as nuts with the League of Gentlemen as a lot of people I know. I think I found it very good and distracting, but I don't think I ever fell fully in love with it in the way that a lot of people did. And as we've already mentioned with each other, I've never actually seen Psychoville, so I've just never got round to it. And weirdly, with Inside Number 9, I remember watching the first series when it aired and being blown away by it and thinking this is absolutely amazing. It's fantastic writing. It's a fantastic idea. Again, it feels really new and fresh. And then for some reason, I just stopped watching it. I watched the first series and absolutely loved it. And then, I don't know, due to timing or wherever I was in my life, or trying to navigate catch up TV platforms, etc. Which I think is an interesting thing. Maybe we can talk about later about how the way that we engage with these works has changed. And then I kind of stopped watching until season 4, and a friend of mine said to me, he was like, "Oh, did you see Inside Number 9 last night? You'd love it." And it was the Zanzibar episode, so it's the Shakespearean rhyming couplets episode, or broadly rhyming couplets episode. So I kind of went back in from there, but again kept kind of dipping in and out, and never actually really finished it. So after we'd had a discussion about it, I actually I've only just finished watching them all. I've basically only just completed watching all of Inside Number 9.
Because they're quite easy to get at the moment, weren't they? Until recently, they were on UK Netflix, at least up to the end of season 4, and I think now they're all on iPlayer at the moment, aren't they?
They are all on iPlayer at the moment. Yeah. So they're all available on iPlayer. I mean, how long until they go onto BritBox, I'm not sure, but so they are all there for you to see. It's good if our if any of our listeners actually want to have either not seen the show or not seen it in its entirety, or want to watch some of the episodes that we're talking about. They, at least in the UK, they'll be able to get on iPlayer, and I'll look up more how internationally available it is before we put this out. My background with the League of Gentlemen work of Pemberton and Shearsmith, I was at sort of early to mid high school, basically, when the League of Gentlemen came out and became popular, and I think I probably only caught it when it hit series 2. But I remember seeing it on one of those. This is a very specific cultural memory. I don't know if you remember this, John, but there was in the late 90s. There was on TV, or maybe around the turn of the millennium. They did this kind of novelty advert that was advertising BBC comedy, and the format it took is they had loads of then BBC, like iconic BBC comedy stars in character, basically telling this one joke. And it was like a collage, like an edit of all these characters telling this one joke, almost like an Aristocrats type thing. And they were all doing that. And I remember just seeing, because there was you'd have like Harry Enfield and characters from Paul Whitehouse, and like a bunch of quite mainstream, Victoria Wood and stuff like that. Just like a bunch of quite familiar mainstream stars. And then you just, part of the joke before I'd seen the show was. You just had like Tubbs and Edward telling like part of the joke, and just like stepping out of the local shop with this makeup on, this sort of pig face makeup, and I was like, what on earth is that? Like I sort of almost like dropped the rest of the advert from my consciousness. I was just like, what is that I've not seen yet? So I became a big League of Gentlemen fan, and I got really into the show and the kind of mythos of the show, because they were always quite good at cultivating that, weren't they? That kind of very theatrical, deeply soaked in horror and weird fiction kind of atmosphere of it, and the kind of world of it, and I actually got really into the not that this is our focus today, but I got really into the Drury Lane live show they did after season 2, which I had on DVD, and I used to kind of, for anyone who pretended to care, I used to talk about that being my favourite live show ever, sort of live comedy show, which I still think is really great, and obviously really theatrically creative. And then I did get into Psychoville. I did watch that in the sort of late noughties, and I think that was like 2009 to 11 that was on, and then that was kind of a half. Obviously we can talk about Psychoville some other time properly, but that after you've seen it, but in some ways, in retrospect now, it seems like a bit of a halfway house, because although actually it's maybe not that simple, but it was like a more cleverly disguised sketch show essentially. Like they dealt with a lot more ongoing narrative, but they were still essentially grotesque sketch show worthy characters, basically, but tied together into more of a narrative. Although it's interesting actually that in some ways Inside Number 9 fractures that, because it is more, it's more of a resurgence of a pure anthology show, isn't it? Despite their roles in almost every episode, both of them, or at least one of them, is in every episode as actors. It is more akin to something like Tales of the Unexpected, isn't it? It's harking back to that kind of model. Yeah, absolutely, it is. It's I think that was what was fascinating about it, about the League of Gentlemen, that it was essentially a sketch show, but it was dressed up in a very different way, with a consistent cast of characters and a semi-consistent narrative. And again, not having seen Psychoville, but Inside Number 9 seemed like kind of a reinvention in many ways, or a refreshing of what episodic TV could do. And it's not necessarily a new thing. I'm not, saying that they're wholly responsible for that.
No. We would be amiss if we didn't mention Black Mirror, obviously.
If we didn't mention Black Mirror, but also while I was doing some research into this, I came across the anthology series called Screen One that the BBC used to do, and that was between 1989 and 98. We'll come back to this later because one of those episodes was Ghost Watch, but more on that later. And I don't really remember seeing many of them because it kind of slightly missed me, I guess. But if you look up things like Play for Today and then Screen One, which followed it, it was very much that format of let's have a bottle episode of a TV show, and that way we can get great casting, we can get big names in it. Because you're not asking them to, sign up to a contract or, appear in a show for a year or more. But again, I don't think we'd had anything like that for years. I don't think we'd had. I certainly can't think of anything. I'm sure other people can, but
yeah.
And I think that was just, fascinating the way that they took genre television and just tried to do something new with it. And I think the results, having just watched them all pretty much back to back, I mean they absolutely stand the test of time. There are some really, really stunning, strong pieces of profound drama in there that that would easily sit up there with Play for Today.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, it's interesting, isn't it? Because you were talking a little bit about the sort of the moment that the League of Gentlemen kind of like hit television screens in the late 90s, turn of the millennium. And you were talking about stuff like the Mighty Boosh, which came a bit later, and you could have you could talk about the sort of stuff that's drawing on. It's interesting. I was thinking about something that came out around about the time, just slightly after the League of Gentlemen at the tail end of the 90s, was Spaced, and whereas Spaced, for all its qualities or deficiencies or whatever, Spaced is very forward looking in terms of its style and its editing, and it was very cool, and it's very, and obviously Edgar Wright brought a lot of that to it stylistically. The League of Gentlemen have always been doing a slightly different thing, haven't they? And Pemberton and Shearsmith's work since that is doing a different thing, because it's very much, although obviously we'll talk about some of the ways that Inside Number 9 indulges in stylistics and kind of the aesthetics of TV itself, and does fun and innovative things with that, but it's always been their fascinations and their strengths have always been a little bit more backward looking, haven't they, in some ways? I don't mean that as a criticism. I mean, like, they are deeply drenched in nostalgic love for things, aren't they? They are all about that, and they're all about paying tribute to these older forms, whether it be 70s horror cinema or 70s 80s TV drama or comedy, and they're so drenched in kind of I guess like semi-serious reverence for a bunch of that sort of stuff, and so much of Inside Number 9 is reviving that theatrical play for TV tradition and infusing it with their own particular fascinations, but also we'll talk about some of the episodes where they're using the medium of TV itself to do things that speak. They're always theatrical. They're always about the theatrical side of television, but they are also interested in the medium itself and the sort of unique things that television can do. Yeah,
they definitely are. That we will touch on that more than once, I'm fairly certain, because it's that idea that they've got to the point where they've been in the industry long enough. There, I think they've done the League of Gentlemen, and that was kind of the first TV that they did, I think, and it became huge. It made them very big names, and as you say, they went off on tour, and then I'm not sure what year it was. I remember when the three of them did Art in the West End together. It then furthered them on to just opened so many doors for them. But primarily, I think their love, all three of them, Gatiss included, I think their love was the television that they grew up on. And by the time you get to Inside Number 9, it's just an opportunity to tick as many boxes as they possibly can. I think that's the beauty of Inside Number 9 and why it's still going and why it's had such longevity both for them and for viewers. I think is the variety of it. And they're like, okay, well, what are we going to do now? Have we done have we done something in the 16th century yet? No, we'll think about that. Okay, have we done anything in the future? No, we'll think. It's almost infinitely variable, and like you say, the way that they touch on so many of what are clearly their favourite genres, and quite often the sheer joyfulness of them doing that really, really seeps through quite a lot.
Yeah, well, I'm thinking. I mean, the easy one to reach for there is the I can't remember the name of it now, but the Witchfinder one in series 2, where
Elizabeth Gadge.
Yeah,
the trial of Elizabeth Gadge.
Yeah, you can just tell that's an absolute playground for them, isn't it? Everything up to and including getting David Warner in.
Yeah.
You feel they could just do the sort of Hammer Restoration era kind of Hammer tributes all day long. If they could just make their bread and butter from that'd be fun.
Yeah, absolutely. It's that's a really interesting point. I hadn't kind of tied together Spaced actually as being kind of around the same era. And I think, contrarily, I think Space probably is one that I really, really fell in love with and know incredibly well. But they're very, very different beasts, aren't they? And of course, obviously, there is Shearsmith does appear in Spaced at least once, I think. And it's I don't know. It's hard to differentiate those two, or to see where they were both going, because you have got kind of the Edgar Wright, very flashy. Almost everything is kind of pop cultural references. It's all very, very contemporary. It's all Buffy and X-Files and Star Wars, and and that's the stuff that they're into, that they're really going for. Whereas these guys are like you say, are harking back to Hammer horror films. Which is not to say that they're mutually exclusive, or the Space writers didn't have those interests as well. It's just that's what they decided to work on and decided to bring to the fore.
But probably the oldest reference I can think of, I know there'll be older ones, but probably in Space the oldest reference I can think of is when they begin Series 2 with a riff on Manhattan, which for the League of Gentlemen would seem quite recent. That's kind of getting to the more recent of where they'd put their reference points.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah, no, it's interesting when this stuff comes out. And I mean, it's aiming for different audiences in a sense as well. And obviously, I actually want to talk to you a little bit later as we get into the more specific episodes about kind of how kind of like permeably in love with realism the Pemberton Shearsmith are, because some of these episodes that we're going to be looking at are obviously much more realistically based than others. And I think there's always been that sense with them that they are kind of. Because I want to talk to you a bit about sort of class awareness and stuff in terms of some of the episodes, because I think you could see them as you could make arguments that they are quite apolitical writers in an overt way, but then so many of these episodes that we'll look at are so painfully aware, maybe in a more sort of centrist tradition of class awareness, of like in that kind of Alan Bennett, Victoria Wood kind of way, where maybe just astute British comedy writers can just never not. It's one of the job requirements is you have to kind of be quite class aware of the minute gradations of class and the separations therein. But I think it's interesting that their fascinations are now kind of completely out of the box, I guess, with Inside Number 9. They can just go after these things. And I just when we look later at episode like Empty Orchestra, for example, you end up looking at some of these Inside Number 9 episodes that you can imagine growing out of League of Gentlemen sketches, and like having the kind of more grounded League of Gentlemen characters like Jeff, people like that. The League of Gentlemen characters that were more focused on the frustrations of life. And weren't towards the gothic horror end of that. Although obviously we'll talk about stuff like the harrowing as well. Which that's probably one of the ones you can most imagine being just a corner of Royston Vasey, isn't it?
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah.
Right down to their makeup and the voices, the sort of mannered voices that they're doing and things like that.
Yeah, very much. And it's interesting that comes quite early, isn't it? That's end of season 1, I think. Yeah, and it's interesting that was kind of a touchstone that they returned to quite early on in that series. But then, up to that point, there had been so much variety. There had been sardines and a huge amount of variety that I guess somewhere they just thought, yeah, that's fine. We've earned this. We've earned this, and also we can go further and darker than we've perhaps ever gone before.
I think actually I'll take that juncture to talk a little bit about the harrowing, because it's sort of central to the experience of me watching the first series for the first time, because it was 2014, so I was already living in London and I was sharing a flat with friends, and I did watch Sardines, which is the first episode ever, because I'd heard it was coming out, and I was a big enough fan of theirs to just check it out, and I was very impressed. And I think I watched every episode after that, not necessarily live, but I watched them all, and I was impressed with the breadth. And we'll go on to talk about the Understudy in particular in season 1, because that's one of the ones you've picked to focus on. But when I came around to the harrowing, I probably like most people who caught that episode, this is the finale of season 1 that involves the young female babysitter going to the sort of dark gothic house and meeting the brother and sister who are caring for their sort of invalid brother upstairs. Like a lot of people who saw that, I was very entertained by it and realised that they were going, into their full gothic well again, and I was enjoying this, the quite silly performances, and I always enjoy Reece Shearsmith when he's doing that thing, that's kind of like a millimetre away from Edward, really. Edward in The League of Gentlemen is one of the funniest performances I've ever seen, and he can always make me laugh by doing any of that. I don't know why either. It's one of those sort of ineffable. I don't know why that voice and that look and that character should be so funny, but it is to me. But anyway, in the harrowing, anyone who's, I should say up front that this would be full of spoilers for all the episodes we talk about. The ending of the harrowing is such the ending of the harrowing is fucking horrifying. I mean, it's unironically horrifying, isn't it? And it's kind of like the only humour contained within is kind of that you are seeing it on a light, a dark comedy programme on BBC Two. I remember that feeling in 2014.
Yeah, absolutely. It's it was really kind of out there and really. It really was quite shocking at the end, but in a way that also again you're coming. So with that series, I mean, when's Blue Jam, for example, and when's Jam? So I wonder if it's coming around that area, and Nighty Night as well, where you've got much darker comedy being experimented with and becoming more mainstream as well, I think. And I do wonder if amongst that whole clique, let's say, of comedic actors and writers that we're talking about in kind of the late 90s into the mid noughties, I wonder if there was a sense of competitiveness as well amongst them, with the idea of let's see how far we can push this, let's see what we can get away with. And I think you'd include Charlie Brooker in that as well, and I think a lot of those writers were genuinely trying to see how far they could stretch it. And I think the harrowing being, the end of the first season, I think is kind of a bit like, okay, here's our flag, right there. We're going to make you laugh, but also we will not shy away from doing something pretty horrifically shocking.
Well, I suppose that's as you talk about calling cards, that's kind of their equivalent of the Prime Minister having to fuck a pig, really, isn't it? If we're talking about Brooker.
Pretty much. Yeah.
I watched that episode with my mum, by the way, everyone. That in 2010 when that 2010 when that was on. I was like, let's check out this new show. Great. I should read the Radio Times more carefully,
Yeah, absolutely.
It's interesting you should mention Nighty Night because Julia Davis is one of the episodes we're going to talk about shortly. Is the Understudy, which Julia Davis is in, isn't she?
Yeah, indeed.
And she's also in Black Mirror as very early on as one of the talent show judges in 15 Million Merits.
Yes, of course. I mean, they're all in all of them. Let's be honest. It's you've got Kevin Eldon in Nighty Night and also in Zanzibar. You've also got Rory Kinnear in Zanzibar, as well as Charlie Brooker's The National Anthem. It's it would take a very long time to draw a proper spider flow chart of all of these actors and writers. But this crossover between them. I'm just astounded that Simon Pegg hasn't turned up in an episode of Inside Number 9 yet. It seems
that's right, he hasn't. I wonder if they'll pick up any ex-Doctor Who actors as well. I could see that. Well, as I say, they've already had Jenna Coleman in series 5, of course, but I wouldn't be surprised if, say, someone in semi-retirement like Peter Davidson or someone just cropped up. That would be good fun.
Yeah, I could definitely see that. Davidson probably, maybe not Colin Baker, but and dear God save us from McCoy. But
controversial. Some of our listeners will have things to say about
Sorry, that's another podcast.
That's one of John's more eccentric opinions. We'll get onto that some other time. I wanted to. The one other reason I wanted to mention the harrowing is when we were picking these favourite episodes, which we'll get into shortly. I've been aware of this since the harrowing. Actually, since season 2 was on, at least. The harrowing was such a great, straightforward, at least at the end, straightforwardly horrific punch to end that series. And I've noticed in every series since that season 2 onwards that I've not really particularly cared for the equivalent tries that they've done, because I think for all the creativity and all the out of the boxness and all the freedom that they've had, I think they have been aware that they're basically in this situation, or they are voluntarily in this situation where they are trying to do a harrowing every season. And what I mean by that really is that the finales of the season so far seem to focus more on the supernatural, or at least the potentially supernatural. And I've not really dug them as much, basically. And I think maybe it's the kind of cliche of like the harrowing's a thing you can do once, and maybe I've just not specifically just been as into the conceits for the other sort of more supernatural season finales. I think they're actually amongst the weakest. I remember thinking that with season 3. With the one about the artistic exhibition, and I remember thinking about but also a little bit about Seance Time in season 2, and then by is it season 4 where they're doing that thing of investigating the flat, the hoarder's flat, the one that Nigel Planer crops up in season 5. You've got the stakeout, the one in the squad car, and they all have supernatural elements, and I just don't think any of them honestly are amongst my favourites. And I noticed that when I was picking favourites, I was like, and I think it's not because I think they're bad. I think if I had to pick another one after the harrowing, it'd probably be the stakeout, actually, the most recent finale. But even that wouldn't be amongst my favourites, and I think it's interesting that I kind of, despite being so impressed with the harrowing, as I'm sure many Inside Number 9 viewers were, despite that being a hook of sorts, and certainly not repulsion for me, their attempts to kind of follow that directly haven't really done it for me. And I wonder if other people are in the same boat.
Yeah, that's interesting. Do you know what? I hadn't even really made the connection that the series finales often carried this thread. Again, this is likely because I'm catching up on the whole series in one chunk rather than watching them episodically, which again brings up the issue of does anyone really watch anything episodically once a week anymore anyway? So in many ways you could say it matters less if you're finishing every season with a certain genre or a certain style, because really season finales and beginnings don't really necessarily count for much anymore. I think there's enough variances with things like that. I mean, I really like Seance Time, which you mentioned, which I've watched a couple of times, and I think really holds up, because in a way that's almost a merging of their two fascinations, I think. So it's the supernatural and how TV works. It's for me that's kind of that's almost their calling card, isn't it?
That's true. That does have that element to it that none of the other ones I just mentioned as sort of supernatural season finales have, I think.
Yeah, but again, and when we get to talking about Deadline as well, that idea of, well, we're going to set up this conceit of being backstage in a TV studio, but real supernatural things are going to happen. And I think that maybe that's what they've tried to do with those series finales, is that they've tried to take that supernatural, but just kind of to bring it in a different way, and to bring different genres into it and different effects in on it. But I see exactly what you mean. I think in terms of how successful they are, and we can talk more about this later. I think in terms of how successful all of the episodes are, and how much they do all follow a certain amount of structure, that once you've seen one series, or once you've seen a number of episodes, you almost feel like you can see where they're going to go with it. So I imagine for them to keep surprising people and surprising themselves and keeping them interesting possibly became more and more challenging as the seasons went on.
Yeah, no, that's true, and I think we'll, after this discussion of the episodes, particularly, we'll talk a tiny little bit about the latest season, Series 5, and ways in which they may or may not be running out of steam. I think there's cases for the defence and the prosecution there. I mean, if you're up for it, John, let's get straight into the episodes chat.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Just to state, so I mean, we've talked about some specific episodes thus far, but we have been quite vague about them. This next section will be completely spoiler filled, and we'll be talking specifics. So, and obviously, a lot of these, not everyone, but a lot of these episodes are, have feature twists and a lot of twists and turns along the way often as well. So you really might want to go away and give these episodes a go if you haven't seen them beforehand, rather than hearing us spoil them. Although I presume most people listening to this will at least have seen a fair bit of Inside Number 9, because if not, what are you doing? What are you thinking?
It's really interesting. I was thinking about this when we were talking about recording this, and for me, in a number of ways, the people least suited to talk about Inside Number 9 are people who have already seen it in many ways, because rewatching a lot
that puts us in a bit of a bind though there, John.
It does put you in a bit of a bind, but like there is a massive difference between watching an episode, most of those episodes for the first time, and rewatching them. It's, the difference is enormous, because so many of them contain twists or reveals or changes in perspective, that actually going back and rewatching them, knowing the twist and knowing what the reveal is, completely changes your attitude towards the episode. So obviously we're only going to be able to talk about these episodes having known the ending and rewatched them, if you see what I mean.
Yeah,
so there's an argument that actually in their purest form they should be enjoyed once without any additional commentary or expectation. That's kind of them in their purest form.
Yeah, ignore him, listeners. Ignore him. Keep listening to the podcast, because podcasts are important. I've decided arbitrarily for my self-worth. Talking us out of a job here, John.
So what I'm saying is, anyone who has ever seen anything and then talks about it is
is a loser.
is not doing anyone any favours.
Yeah. No, well, I appreciate that. Thank you. I'll put that in the promo text. So let's get straight into it. So I mean, we didn't space this so that we were trying to get all the series in or anything like that. We weren't trying to pick like a certain number from each series. We had no quota like that. So actually, I think that in itself will be interesting in terms of where we fall, and most heavily in terms of our choices. But one of your choices, John, and the only series one that we're focusing on is the Understudy, which is the fifth episode of series 1 in 2014. Would you like to talk a bit about why you chose that?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I guess to say a bit more about where I'm coming from, I'm coming from having done a bit of work in the theatre, and having a great love of Shakespeare, for example, as well as lots of classical drama, inverted commas. So I think I was very, very drawn to this one. This is one that I've watched a number of times, because I think it's one of the things that they do very well is that they take something that feels actually quite familiar. The idea of an understudy plotting against the star is, it's not a new idea. Is it all about Eve, or is it whatever?
Well, I was going to say we discussed all about Eve on this podcast, so yeah, it does ring a few bells.
Yeah, exactly, and it's quite a well-known tale of success and someone lacking success, and that kind of inversion and that role reversal. But again, just the conceit of having it kind of in an understudy dressing room, and the way those characters are drawn. I mean, the Pemberton character really is horrific. He's he's utterly hateful, and the understudies seem very sweet and very lovely, and you're really rooting for them. And I think this is the first point of many, of which I'm going to say that I think one of Inside Number 9's strengths has always been its casting all the way through. The casting for every single episode is very hard to fault anywhere at all. So you do have Julia Davis here giving an almost underused performance, given that Julia Davis is actually quite a big comedy name. But it's because of that ability to bring people in to give really subtle, really strong performances, I think is what makes a lot of the episodes of Inside Number 9 really fly. And you've got Lindsay Marshall, who is wonderful. And also you have people coming in with quite a degree of credibility as well. So, Lindsay Marshall, for example, is a very well-respected Shakespearean actor, and coincidentally enough, the last thing I saw her in was Emilia in Othello, which Rory Kinnear was Iago. So you kind of see how these strands kind of tie themselves together. And Di Botcher as well, who's who for most of us who love the thick of it will always be the have you ever cleaned up your mother's piss woman. But even those little parts are absolutely wonderful. And I think in terms of Rosie Cavallero, I hope I've said that correctly, who is the dresser. I think it's one of the creepiest performances in the entire thing, in all of the series, in a show that really prides itself on kind of unsettling you. Spoiler alert, everyone, obviously. The last 5 minutes of this episode are genuinely chilling because it lacks any real what we would identify as menace or scariness or threat or anything, and it's just so subtly done. It's really, really wonderful.
Well, it's drawing a bit on the sort of Misery kind of I'm your biggest fan kind of
yeah, absolutely, yeah, it's definitely drawing on that, and obviously it's wearing its Shakespeare credentials pretty heavily as well, and all of the allusions to Macbeth. It's obviously no coincidence whatsoever that that's the play that they happen to be doing at that time. But I think it's just done with, it's done with love. They're clearly, they love the theatre as well, and they've obviously done plenty of theatre at this point, and they're coming from a place of experience. And also having had a number of friends who have done understudy roles for quite big West End shows, it's doesn't seem to be that far off reality, a lot of it as well. There's just a lot of sitting around, there's a lot of not doing anything, there's a lot of learning lines and having understudy runs for almost certainly no reason. It's it's a really weird existence that I think comes across really well, and that comes across really well, I think, in Lindsay Marshall's performance as well, that she is the one who is kind of trying to get them out of this, that is trying to spur them on, and in a sense is the misdirect, that you think it's her that has nobbled the star. It's all of those things come together in just such a I'm going to say richly drawn, and sound very pompous indeed. It's such a richly drawn way, but also it does draw on things like Ronald Harwood's The Dresser as well, for example. So it's obviously riffing on things that have gone before, but bringing a kind of new, slightly supernatural, slightly quirky angle to those things. And I think in that way it just, maybe it's just me, but it hits a high degree of all of my buttons this episode.
Yeah, no, I hear that. Yeah, there were two moments I particularly liked in this episode. Actually, one of them was, you talk about Julia Davis being slightly underused, and I kind of agree. She's sort of playing to an extent a slightly. We'll talk a little bit throughout about the Pemberton and Shearsmith's relationship with political correctness, because I think essentially they quite happily don't have one. Really, I think for probably better and for worse, you could say. She's drawing on some of those sort of like comedy lesbian kind of tropes that they've kind of like arguably dabbled in, going back to the League, with characters like Pauline and stuff like that. Julia Davis is playing that kind of character in this episode. But I actually really like the episode you were talking about, how monstrous and grotesque Pemberton's portrayal as the sort of initial star of the show is in this. I love that moment when he's so drunk she's having to put him in the shower, and he's kind of coming on to her, like with the kind of Bond pussy galore kind of thing of I could cure you, and just leering at her, and she just like shoves him in the shower, like pulls the curtain, and she's like bloody turns. Like you sort of see the amount of whatever her sexual identity, you just see the amount of bullshit she has to put up with. She's this kind of unsympathetic character, but you see the shit she has to put up with every single night. And it's just this lovely, like succinct human moment.
It is, yeah. I think that's interesting as well in terms of what you were saying earlier about class awareness, and I think status awareness as well. And I think this is one of the things this episode does really well, where you have your one big star who is fundamentally at the top of the tree and is there perhaps putting the bums on seats. But then you hit every ladder on the way down, or every rung of the ladder on the way down, where you have the understudies, you have the put-upon company manager who actually is a bit overly officious and, makes them sign out to go and get coffee, although that's a bit of subterfuge. And then you have the very meek dresser who clearly is putting up with a lot. And then right down at the bottom, he says, using all of the class cliches that he's about to contest, you have the neighbours, you have this very working class couple that come to the theatre to see him, and are really kind of dismissed by him. in that this is not their world and that they won't understand it. And, you know, he makes snippy comments about, you know, yes, it wasn't the actors learning all their lines and wasn't the performance. It was the set was wonderful, and
they want the adulation, but they hate the audience specifically.
Yeah, absolutely. But I think there is a really interesting conversation going on there as well, which you can delve deeper into if you want to, which is what is theatre? What is, you know, particularly Shakespeare? What is that for, and who is that for? And the idea that two perfectly lovely normal people get to come to that show, but they can't really articulate what they thought about it, and they're not they don't necessarily have the background to allow them to appreciate it or engage with it in a certain way. I think there's a very interesting conversation there that they're having, that they're starting, which is about, you know, who is this type of theatre for, and therefore, you know, who is entertainment for? It's, you know, where do you draw the line between highbrow and lowbrow? And we'll obviously talk about this more in other episodes as well. But, you know, they wear their intellectual, cultural credentials quite happily. You know, to touch on Greek tragedy and reference Chekhov and you know, and do an entire iambic pentameter episode. It's they're not afraid to say, yeah, we know stuff. We know stuff about what you would consider high art, but also we're interested in what appeals to all sorts of people, to all different classes, to all different strata of society.
Yeah, and they've got that. They've come by that honestly, in the sense of you know, I mean, they're from that sort of Python-esque tradition of seeding your work with that kind of stuff, but they're decidedly not from an Oxbridge background. You know, they're not from the South, of course, as well, which the majority of Python were. You know, so there's different strands of things going on here. You know, I've already mentioned like Alan Bennett and Victoria Wood in passing. You know, but there's a lot wrapped into it. When we certainly will talk later about, you know, their sense, Pemberton and Shearsmith's sense of sort of hard-won snobbery almost, or like, you know, or certainly like that, you know, their cultural assumptions. I just wanted to briefly mention before we move on to the next episode that one of my other favourite moments, and this is just as a politics nerd really, and it's just the fact that we're now far enough away from 2014. I mentioned this to you in the chat earlier, John, but like the moment when Pemberton's character, who's now been disabled, you know, he comes back to visit in that really awkward scene, and he's talking about the work he's been doing, and he says he's been narrating an audiobook about the EU, and he just says, you know, you think you know the half of it, in a really sort of dark, foreboding way, you know, and he kind of, in retrospect, it's such a nice capturing of that kind of quite mainstream, growing, like soft but you know, glowering over the horizon kind of Euroscepticism that obviously seems a lot more significant now from the perspective of 2020 than it did then, you know. Yeah,
absolutely, and there are, you know, lovely little bits sprinkled through, you know, usually every episode like that stick out again on rewatching. The bit I like in that very same scene is where he talks about doing audiobooks, and he says, I'm giving Jarvis a run for his money. And on first listening you think, oh yeah, you know, Jarvis Cocker, Six Music, you know, dulcet tones. But then after a second you go, oh no, he's talking about Martin Jarvis. Surely he's talking about, you know, well-respected old love Martin Jarvis with the silky voice, who presumably has also done hundreds of thousands of audiobooks as well. So there's just these lots of tiny little jokes, I think, that land very, very well. I wanted to say as well, I mentioned that I think one of the influences is Ronald Harwood's play The Dresser, which is about an old lush, about an old lovey basically, who's giving a performance of King Lear, and his dresser, his assistant, who, you know, is very long suffering and kind of putting up with his foibles and trying to keep him together. And Reece Shearsmith was actually in the West End in 2016 with Ken Stott as the main character. In fact, I'm surprised Ken Stott hasn't been in an episode of Inside Number 9 yet, actually. And I just think that's very interesting, because this clearly comes after it was written and aired. And I don't know, is it, you know, how much of these shows kind of audition tapes for future work, and how much do these things just tumble out where casting directors think, yes, they can do that as well. They've got more range and versatility. I think that's another thing actually in terms of going from League of Gentlemen, can't talk about Psychoville as we know, but to to something like Inside Number 9, where it gives them an opportunity to show range as actors, as performers, to say, League of Gentlemen is one thing, but fundamentally you're going to have, like half a dozen characters each that you're just going to keep doing over and over again, basically, throughout the series, whereas here it's like, no, I'm going to be a different character of a different status and background and demeanour every single time. So I think as performers as well, I think it's must be enormous fun for them, but enormously satisfying, I'd imagine.
Oh, I'm sure. Yeah. I think that's probably one of the reasons they do it. So I'll move us on. The next one that I chose this formally, but I think you'd agree, John, that this is one that either of us could have ended up choosing. Was in Series 2 the following year in 2015. Another one that took people by surprise, and it was kind of probably as effective in its own way, surprise, as the Harrowing in its placement in that series, because the second series kicked off with La Couchette, which is the one set in the sort of the train on the European train, sleeper train, which is quite low key and quite realist and quite unspectacular, and it's a good episode, but it kicks the show off into what you might think would be a normal gear for it. And then the episode that we're talking about, the 12 Days of Christine, as the second episode, I think really well. I'll talk a little bit about my reaction to it straight off, because it was a very, very emotional reaction. So I had quite a difficult year in 2015, just personally. The main thing that happened is both my mum's parents died within a few months of each other. They were very old, but it was a very upsetting year for that reason, and there was other stuff to do in my personal life that was quite difficult that year. So I was probably on a bit of an emotional edge anyway. But I saw 12 Days of Christine when it was on. And I watched it alone initially. I think I was still living with flatmates, but my flatmates were out or busy. And I watched it alone, and I burst into tears at the end of it, like completely lost it, basically. And it became, and there's been a few episodes of Inside Number 9 like this for me, but it became I became an evangelical for it, basically. I started showing people it in that sort of ostentatious way where you kind of bring it around to people's house with the DVD and stuff like that, or you kind of like send them the iPlayer link and things like that. And I watched it in person with people. I watched it in person with my girlfriend after that, with my flatmates, with my mum, next time I was home, that kind of thing. And I kind of, like, you've got to see this thing. And I kind of cried several other times at it as well. So the reason I picked this, I just thought it'd be kind of dishonest almost of me not to pick the 12 Days of Christine, and I know it's a fan favourite as well, but for anyone who's not seen it, the 12 Days of Christine is basically it's taking some of what the Understudy does, in a way of having that 5-act structure where it moves you through time quite efficiently with clear markers of change, and 12 Days of Christine does that for using a sort of months of the year structure. It takes you through, I guess, 12 years of this girl's life. She's played by Sheridan Smith, who was then, kind of accelerating her sort of theatrical career, wasn't she, and kind of becoming more of a respected name. Obviously, she'd been working in television and particularly in sort of like sitcom for a while. But it turns out to be this very very moving story of kind of life and the progression of life, and then you realise kind of towards the middle of the episode that you're dealing with something a bit more profound and a bit more dislocated and a bit more disconcerting. And it ends up being the story of this woman whose life is, is flashing before her eyes, and it's kind of, as with a lot of these structures and containers for stories, you could look at it as kind of gimmicky, but it's just this really artful way of making you very, very involved with this wonderful Sheridan Smith performance, and with this cast of characters that she's got around her, and there's bits and pieces of kind of artistry in it to do with stuff they're trying to convey, like, do you remember the bit where, well, the sort of bits where she's dealing with her dad who's got dementia or something similar, that who's kind of fading from her life in that way, and then he dies and he kind of returns back, and it's one of the things that like throws you towards the end of the episode. You realise reality is fracturing around her and around you as the viewer, but he returns and he's kind of got his speech back, and he's more articulate now, and he's not like he was in reality, and then he's and it's throwing you, and that really spoke to me, because my dad passed away in ages ago now, in 2006, but it really spoke to the way that when you suffer a loss like that, those people, those figures that you lose in life, they can return to you in dreams, and they'll sometimes be different, they'll sometimes be disconcertingly different, and sometimes it's a pleasant experience, sometimes it's unpleasant. Your memories, as obviously most vividly reified in dreams, but your memories in general can alter and shift around you, and they are quite fluid, and that makes your reality quite fluid, And it just, for that and a host of other reasons, it's just, I think it's an absolutely fantastic episode. I'll talk a little bit more later on in the podcast about what I think my favourite episodes, or what I think the best episodes of Inside Number 9 are, but I think this is kind of in a glorious way, a kind of centre of the Venn diagram where you could show this to almost anyone who hadn't watched the show, and they'd like it. And it's also one actually in which Shearsmith and Pemberton feature very lightly. Which allows Sheridan Smith to take sort of glorious centre stage, doesn't it?
Do you know what? I'm not even sure who is Reece Shearsmith in it. I know.
Pemberton
is the best friend, but
he plays the scary guy in the raincoat.
Oh, of course, yes.
Yeah. So he's barely in it, really.
He is barely in it. Which again is kind of interesting, given what I've just said about them, kind of wanting to do things to give themselves range, but also I think they just want to tell the best story, and if they're right for the parts, then they'll play them, and if they're not, then they don't mind kind of getting out of the way. Which I guess when you're doing 5-6 episode series, there's enough time for you to shine in something else, so you're probably not quite so precious about who's got more lines in each episode. Just to echo what you've said, really. I mean, I think it takes your breath away on the first viewing. It's one of those things where, as I said earlier, I think what Inside Number 9 does a lot is that idea of there being a reveal, or there being something that kind of changes your perspective on everything that's gone before it. I'm going to be highly pretentious now and reference peripeteia, which is the Greek idea, the Greek dramatic idea that there's a turning point, that there's a reversal of circumstances at some point in the play, in the narrative, where everything shifts and suddenly you have a different aspect on it. And I think Inside Number 9, does that a lot. I think you could you could almost certainly analyse it, and I'm not quite nerdy enough to do this, but I can't remember which episode I was watching. Oh, it might have been To Have and To Hold, which we'll come back to later, but has a proper twist where everything that's gone before it you now have to reimagine in your own mind. And actually, for some reason this time I noticed that it came at the 18-minute mark, and I was actually kind of tempted to go through all the episodes that have this major twist or this major reversal, because obviously they're making episodic 28.5-minute television episodes, and they've got to have that structure in it. I do wonder how many of them those turns come around the 18-minute mark, and I think maybe it's slightly later with the 12 Days of Christine, because I don't think it fully falls into place until kind of quite close to the end.
Yeah, well, good twists, I think, in general, this is a blanket statement, but good twists in general are supported by sort of very careful, gradual seeding, really, aren't they? In the setting, I suppose, to put it less generously, you are kind of boiling a frog in terms of the audience. But it's, I think the great thing about Christine is, although the twist of the nature of specifically what's happening to her is important and is sold as important, by the music and by Smith's performance, etc., and does make you watch the episode differently, obviously, the second time, the sense of dislocation and being perturbed by the mood of it and the atmosphere of it is its own reward, isn't it? It's kind of the twist is important to put all that together, but it's the power of it isn't reliant on it in a way. You could finish that episode and be much less explicit about what was happening, and you'd come away with a disturbing and beautiful piece of television.
Yeah, you definitely would, and I think there's an interesting parallel here as well. So I've just rewatched Love's Great Journey, which is one of the kind of later Series 5 episodes, and it suddenly struck me that there's a comparison between those, because taking away all the bells and whistles and twists and whatever of the 12 Days of Christine, fundamentally it's a very sweet story about real ordinary, let's say, working class people who are just getting on with their lives, and their lives are sometimes fine and their lives are sometimes difficult, and I think that's what comes across and makes it so humane. Is we're not in a particularly exciting or exotic world here. We're in a flat in a tower block with someone who works in a shoe shop. But seeing their life and seeing their everyday concerns, I think, as you've said already, I think that does kind of show where Pemberton and Shearsmith's kind of class concerns come, and where their idea that they want tell ordinary people's stories. And again, looking at Love's Great Journey is a remarkable piece of television that just focuses on kind of everyday existence and its fractiousness and its weirdness and its difficulty. And I think the 12 Days of Christine does that very well indeed. Her concern for her son and the difficulties that we're showed that her relationship is having and the ill health of her parents and all of those things. These are, just utterly human, everyday things.
Yeah.
And like you say, if you come at them, like a lot of these Inside Number 9 episodes, I think if you come at them when you're in a slightly vulnerable state, it's watch yourself, and you're not necessarily expecting that. You're expecting maybe from Steve Pemberton and Reece Shearsmith, you're expecting half an hour of slightly diverting, maybe slightly dark, wacky TV, and you don't. You frequently you just get these absolute gut punches.
Yeah, you get a bit more than you bargain for sometimes. I completely agree with all that, and I was thinking in terms of portraying, kind of working class lives with sensitivity, but also profundity and kind of depth, and heft, because obviously all lives have huge drama and emotional heft to them, and actually, the use they make of time to say goodbye in that. During the episode, but also at the end, it that kills me as well, emotionally. But and that's using a piece of kind of easily derided kind of pop operatic kind of pop culture, so movingly. And what it actually reminded me of was at the end of season 2 of The Royal Family when Denise is there's that scene where Denise goes into labour and she's there with Jim with her dad, and they're playing I think it's Charlotte Church. And that's a sort of similar use of the pop end of operatic culture, but kind of so deftly soundtracking this kind of huge life event, featuring family bonding and real hope and sorrow and fear and everything, and it just kind of echoed that for me, I guess. That being a piece of television I saw when I was much younger, that also slayed me.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, there's an entire conversation here to be had about their use of music as well, and the choices of songs that they choose to soundtrack the episodes rather than the incidental music itself, the soundtracks that they choose. So I'm thinking of kind of the classical music that is used in lots and lots of episodes. They do use quite well-known pieces of popular classical music to give it a different feel and a different atmosphere. I'm thinking, you've got Vivaldi and Diddle Diddle Dumpling. So I think their choice of music, or I'm assuming their choice of music, or they're involved in the conversation about choosing the music, is incredibly astute. Yeah.
I should move us on, as always. The next episode that I picked again is the Devil of Christmas, which was on Netflix until recently. It was being showcased as part of season 3, which it sort of, I think in production terms it is really, because the Devil of Christmas was on in the I think it was on about the 27th of December, after Christmas 2016, and then the series 3 proper followed 5 episodes in 2017. So I caught the Devil of Christmas on telly in the days after Christmas when I was at home in Manchester at my mum's house, and it was a bit like Christine actually, because I kind of I just went insane on it. I started showing it to everyone, and I started, if someone was like, "Did you catch anything good over Christmas?" I'm like, "Yes, this one thing. Watch it. Here it is. Here's the link." You'll find it astounding. And I kind of started spreading it. Those are probably the 2 episodes of Inside Number 9 where I've done that the most for, actually. Those two together. So it's interesting they come sequentially like this. Not strictly sequentially in the show, but quite close by. And it was it was a sort of harbinger of season 3, so it got me very hyped for that as well. And I should say series 3. So series 3, whether you include this or not, is my favourite individual series. And if you include it, it's far and away my favourite individual series. So Inside Number 9, basically. But this is the one. If you've seen it, obviously you'll know. But this is the one that is presented as a kind of lost artifact of late 70s, very early 80s television sort of play. to do with supernatural goings on in a sort of alpine chalet, and it sort of plays around with the sort of Krampus mythology, which has become a bit better known since then. But this is the one. Obviously, in addition to that, it's presented as a sort of commentary track. You know, there's an overlain commentary track in which they cast Derek Jacobi to play this television director of the time, who's commenting and answering questions about this work as you go along. So as well as being an astoundingly detailed and kind of well researched and carried out pastiche, essentially, some akin to sort of like Garth Marenghi's Dark Place, really, is one of the few things you can compare it to of television of that era. I won't even attempt to summarize the sort of technical stuff they went into there, because online you can find commentary tracks where Shearsmith and Pemberton have talked about all the care they went to. But as well as all that, they are also utilizing this kind of this sort of form of art, which I guess has come to us primarily through DVD commentary tracks, and Laserdisc commentary tracks before that, where creatives talk about their work, and that's kind of what Jacobi's character is doing in this. And the reason, maybe the reason that they use that so deftly in this is because obviously Pemberton and Shearsmith are no strangers to that form. They've done commentaries on most of their work, and they were doing that in the early days of DVDs for the League series, and they're very good at it. They're very witty, they're very funny about their own work, they're very self-deprecating, but they're also very thoughtful about it. And they've continued that. You can get several commentary tracks inside Number 9 online quite easily, I think, particularly for season 2 and 3. But the way in which they use all that stuff in The Devil of Christmas is fascinating. And I was talking to my brother about this just yesterday. But we talked about the harrowing before. But in terms of just, so one thing Inside Number 9 can do is just have horrifying endings to varying degrees. The one where it's worked best on me of all, and it's actually kind of not close, is The Devil of Christmas. I find the ending of The Devil of Christmas like enduringly shocking and disturbing, and it's kind of in a weird way one of the scariest things I've seen on television. Like, I think it's kind of and I kind of, one of the reasons I was recommending it to everyone, sadist that I am, was I thought it might have similar effects on them, really. But it's kind of, because I watch a fair bit of horror. I'm not like a horror buff as such, but I watch it, and I've kind of got a moderately strong stomach for it. I kind of, and it's not, there's nothing on here that would get this an 18 certificate or anything. It's kind of, it's very, it's very contained in that sense. But we can talk a bit about the ending in a minute. But I find it very, very shocking, and I just kind of couldn't wash the stain of it out of my head afterwards, in a way.
Yeah, you heard this here first. I mean, if David recommends you watch something that he absolutely loves, buyer beware. It's because he's trying to foist traumatic television on you.
Yeah, usually.
Yeah, the commentary is, as you say, it's a great conceit. There are lovely little moments as well where it's not just the director commenting on the work, but it's bringing up all of the continuity errors and really buying into this being a kind of cult classic, something that is very geeky, that has a real fandom, and it's those touches, it's those nuances that really sell it, because you do look, you think you're watching, I don't know, Quatermass Experiment or something along those lines, where you've got the director saying, "Oh, of course, it was the end of the day, and we were losing the actor, and the picture was in the wrong place." And those little details for me really, really make that episode so special. Is that it's beautifully observed, and it's all very, very nicely played. I actually hadn't realised until you told me that it was Derek Jacobi, which is kind of remarkable, I guess, that that they got him to do that. But also he's really underplaying it as well. He's a very skillful actor, obviously, but he's very much underplaying that part, I would say, and really selling that. Yeah,
and the ultimate, this is another great thing where the twist, because there are kind of, well, there are a series of in fiction twists, obviously portrayed in this episode, but then the main Inside Number 9 twist in this obviously makes such good use of how a commentary track can be different things in different circumstances, because obviously as I say, spoilers for all of these, the ultimate twist is that the commentary track is a police interview. That this director is being interviewed for essentially the production. I mean, they're quite unlikely, if you really think about it, they're quite unlikely scenario in which this mainstream production was used to hide a snuff film. But that's the situation you're in. The female star of this fictional TV play was also killed on camera very efficiently after the cessation of production, which is how the episode ends. You end up after a series of very, very Tales of the Unexpected-esque twists. You get the kind of real one, the quote unquote real one, which is the impending murder of this girl by a guy in a Krampus mask. And there's something I think. The way all the artful, the comedic artfulness of the episode and everything, the way it kind of starts to fall away at the end there, it's a little bit like the kind of disconcerting elements of Christine, where you've been so swept up in the style of this and the ride of it and everything. I think one of the reasons it works so well with me is you're kind of, the rug's being pulled out from under you and it's happening quite gradually, but it's all happening in a bit of a hurry as well. It's happening. You don't have time to react to it properly, and it puts you more in the position of the female actress character who's undergoing this horror than a lot of horror movies successfully do. Because there aren't many horror movies where you feel that the audience is struggling to keep up with the events as much as the protagonists are. And I think this has that effect, and I think that's part of the reason it shocked me so much.
Yeah, I think as well. I mean, the writing is great here as well. It's that one line. It's Jacoby saying, there's always the moment when you see in their eyes that they realise what's going on.
Yeah,
and that's absolutely chilling because we're kind of not sure either what's going on at that point. So you're absolutely right.
He's talking about us as well in a way.
Yeah, we are having that realisation at the same time as she is, and it's genuinely shocking.
And actually that's what Christine says as well, isn't it? She says, I think I know what's going on now.
It is, yeah, when she's looking through the photo book, yeah. She says,
I know what this is now. That's what she says.
I know what this is now, yeah.
Yeah, she could almost be talking about the genre almost, it's kind of, I know what I'm in here,
Yeah.
So yeah, it really struck me. And as I say, if you want to, this is where I was saying I'd talk about what I think some of the best ones are. I think in a way this might be the best episode, in my opinion, of Inside Number 9, because it does all that stuff you were talking about, of reverently homaging particular televisual styles and the medium itself and the characters involved in it and the kind of the power dynamics involved in the production of art and all that kind of stuff. And it does it just on a technical level just stunningly well, using a lot of period equipment and expertise. And it's really funny as well, so like you can watch it. I mean, if you skip the last two minutes, you can watch it on a kind of Dark Place level. You can just enjoy that expertly done pastiche. But there's obviously a lot more going on to it, and it just I honestly can't like with Christine on a emotional level. I can't detach this from my initial reaction to it. It really shook me like very little other TV has.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, to come back to the casting as well. I mean, Rula Lenska as the mother is wonderful, and it's let's not forget it's Jessica Raine. It's the lovely midwife from Call the Midwife, and this is going out at Christmas, and maybe it's just my family where at least 75% of us are forced to endure Call the Midwife at Christmas, but the idea that one Christmas it could be the same actress in this as well airing at the same time is again, I think they're playing within the industry in terms of knowing, how TV schedules work as well, and how schedules are put together and how seasonal programming works. Yeah. So it brings a whole nother layer of mischief into it. I think that's actually mischief's actually probably
chosen word.
Yeah, it's quite a good way of describing it. I think that a lot of what they're up to is incredibly mischievous in seeing what they can do and what they can get away with.
Yeah, and of course, obviously that goes back to the League of Gentlemen Christmas special as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So moving on to season 3 proper, the Riddle of the Sphinx. This was one of your choices, John. This is, for anyone playing along at home, this is the crossword one. Basically, that's how you summarise this one. Would you like to talk a bit about this one?
Yeah, absolutely. It's, as you know, I did it a little bit over making one of my choices, because there are a lot of episodes I love, and Zanzibar came very close, but realised it would probably just be me showing off my knowledge of Shakespeare, which I doubt makes terribly interesting listening. But the Riddle of the Sphinx, it's just stuck with me. It's it's incredible. I've watched it maybe 3 times now, I think, literally in maybe the last week or so. It's an extraordinary piece of TV. It's fascinating and dark and actually quite funny, and again ties into. I mean, it wears its badge quite obviously in terms of kind of Egyptian mythology and Greek mythology, particularly. It's very much drawing on Greek tragedy, and it's drawing on the whole Oedipus myth, and again it is drawing on that idea of peripeteia about the reveal, about the moment when Oedipus realizes that he's killed his father and been sleeping with his mother. It's what happens then, what happens to a human being's mind at the point that they suddenly everything has changed, everything in the world has reversed, and everything you thought you knew and everything you thought was true, and the way that you've conducted yourself and the way that you've lived your life up to that point suddenly is just completely destroyed and completely taken away from you.
And of course the Greek mythological stuff is aided by the fact they reference Pygmalion.
Yes, yeah, exactly. So there's references to Pygmalion. There's we can spoilers. We don't need to say this now. You can throw in Shakespeare again. You can throw in Titus Andronicus, where you've got someone eating the flesh of their children baked in a pie. So you're drawing on that as well. So you've got all of these influences, and it's also got that. It's interesting. We mentioned earlier actually that they're not Oxbridge. They're not part of that heritage, but it has that fascination with Oxbridge, with that kind of system and with that kind of education, and it does seem very Browning version lovely and aspirational and all of those things, and bringing in this young girl. Dare we say young girl with a regional accent, which means we know she is of a different status and class. Pits those things against each other, and again, you just think you know where you are and what's happening, and it's all very, very plausible. I mean, again, without drawing graphs and flowcharts, I don't know. Has this got the most number of twists, where it twists and then twists back out, in on itself,
and the power
and then
dynamic
twists back in on
shifts
itself
every
again.
time as well. Yeah.
This one really, really goes around, and I think actually, so which is it? Is it the bill before this one?
The bill, is at the start of series 3. Yeah,
before this, and I was thinking, because I was watching them sequentially. I think what's interesting is in the bill, when the waitress's throat gets slit the first time, I genuinely gasped. I didn't see that coming at all, and I found that really shocking. But obviously you then get the reveal that the whole thing's a setup. And I think it's really interesting that they've done this a few times, where they've kind of made you feel safe in a way, because they've shown you episodes where something horrific happens, and then they go, actually, it didn't happen. It's fine. It didn't happen. Something else happened that maybe wasn't so, but it didn't happen. So this coming straight after it, you're watching, the final scene of this unfold, and you're just thinking, this must be a trick, because this is too much. This is awful. This is this is absolutely awful. They're not really going to do this, are they? So I'd say for 98% of this episode, I was expecting a last twist where this wasn't what was happening. It was some fantasy. They were going to find some way out of it, because the final reveal and the final moments of him being their father and him having eaten the flesh of his daughter. It's genuinely gruesome
and creeped on her earlier, of course.
Exactly, and that's kind of the thing I mean about the pure reaction of watching it the first time, not knowing how it ends, and watching it the second time, because when he's creeping on her, when you watch that the second time, that gives you a real jolt as well. And makes
not that it's pleasant the first time round. I mean, this is another repulsive Pemberton performance, of course.
Of course, but with the additional knowledge of that she's his daughter, and again, there's lovely little nods to knowledge, like the reference to Chekhov's gun. That ends the whole thing, where, you know, as Anton, I mean, they mention the seagull right off the top, and that's the reason he's got a gun. So it's almost like a double reference, where he's saying, "Oh, this is just a prop from a production of the Seagull I was in," and, you know, and finishing by quoting, "Dear Anton would say, never show a gun in the first act if you're not going to fire it in the fifth because people feel cheated." So, I mean, obviously, there's a lot of very, very clever stuff going on here, and obviously we could talk a lot about the crossword itself and the conceit, and, you know, how it appeared in The Guardian on the day of airing, and I mean, I'm fascinated by that, and I think, given the combination of watching this episode and being in lockdown again, has given me one of my, I don't know, maybe 2 or 3 yearly spurts of thinking I'm going to learn how to do cryptic crosswords. But
yes, I don't do them myself, but I found the fact that this episode, I think consciously on their part, functions as a bit of a beginner's tutorial. You feel like you're learning stuff through it, although, you know, obviously I'll remember a fraction of it, you know, but it was very interesting on that level as well. And I think one of the reasons this episode is really good is you know, you were saying how horrific the kind of ending is, and how, you know, how ridiculously OTT the kind of tragedy wrought here, you know, literal tragedy wrought here is. I think one reason it doesn't hit me as hard as something like The Devil of Christmas is, and I mean this as praise, but in a nice way, I think both Shearsmith and Pemberton are in a lightly camp gear here. You know what I mean? They're kind of, I mean, obviously Pemberton when he's showing off near the start of the episode, but I think Shearsmith, when he comes in and he's doing a kind of avenging character kind of thing, he can't help but give it that slightly camp edge, you know, that kind of, he's never, I really love both of them as actors, but I was watching an ITV drama recently where Shearsmith was, I think it was on about 2 years ago, where Shearsmith was playing a you know, a sort of Black Widower character, you know, he's this kind of guy who, based on facts, who, you know, killed you know, one of his partners and fleeced the other ones out of money, and, you know, threatened them and stuff, and I was trying to take it seriously, but couldn't. But I was hugely enjoying it, but I just couldn't, because the character he was playing was too close to a Reece Shearsmith character. You know what I mean? He's always just got that thing. So the character in this, although it's on the surface of it, is quite a serious character and situation he's playing, it's always just got that slight comedic edge. And again, I don't mean that's an attack. I really, really enjoy this episode. But I think that's what stops it being. Although the events portrayed are horrific, you know, including her paralysis, which is fucking horrible as well. Yeah. You know, it's just got that slightly. It's at the very, very darkest edge of dark comedy, but I think it's got that comedic prism to it for me that offsets it slightly. You know?
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, again, that's what they do very well. There's this discussion to be had about what is inside Number 9. What are they making? You know, it's gonna get billed as comedy because it's from a, you know, comedy production stable with 2 very respected comedy writers, but is it it comedy? Is that what we're watching here? It's again harking back to things like Love's Great Journey. It's like not really any laughs in that, you know. It's there's no jokes here. There's just kind of stuff that's incredibly hard to watch or very thoughtful. I'm trying to think if there are actually any decent gags in the Riddle of the Sphinx. But,
I think there's quite a lot of funny stuff around, you know, his pomposity and around her kind of initial act as the kind of untutored, unwashed you know, girl coming in, and her playing up to that. And you know, I was saying, like, you know, again getting the political references, you know, when he's trying to teach her, you know, the clue that goes from Tory leader, and he's looking for the answer T, and she just goes Boris Johnson, you know, and little things like that.
Interesting crossover there. In doing my research, that's an actor called Alexandra Roach,
she's great. She's really great at that.
She played the young Margaret Thatcher in The Iron Lady.
Did she?
She did indeed. Yeah.
That's a film that I've still not been able to gear up to watch. Put it that way.
I don't. I mean, David, we're in lockdown. I don't honestly think now is the time. But
no, probably not. Although I may watch an episode of The Crown just for Gillian Anderson. You know. Which will be a very complicated experience, I think. Well, I'll move this on reluctantly, because there is a lot to talk about in that one. To one of my choices, also in series 3. I mean, I think you started to see why we both hold this series in such high regard, but you know, for overlapping reasons. But this weirdly, but I've known this for quite a while, and I knew obviously coming to this conversation. this is my favourite episode of Inside Number 9, and I hope I will qualify that. No, I won't make excuses for it, obviously, but I'll talk about why. But Empty Orchestra, which is the karaoke episode, it's useful to talk about Inside Number 9, isn't it? For most of these, you can say, a bit like Friends, you can say the one where, or this is that one. You can sort of name the central gimmick of it, and that's kind of it. So this is the one set in a karaoke booth, and it's basically a sort of dark comedy drama musical. Farce, tragedy, everything. All human life is here, John. Set in a karaoke booth with a work do, basically, and it's kind of I can't remember if they're specific about what they do, but I get this is I'm partly drawing on my own biography here, but I get the impression they work in financial services, basically, like in a kind of insurance office or a building society or a bank or something like that. I can't remember the specific, but they I myself worked in a building society from about 2010 to 2013, before I worked in universities as I do now. For my specific past, but also for anyone who's worked with a kind of small, close knit team, for a small team at work, where they can often feel those sort of work environments, either happily, unhappily, or somewhere in between. They can often feel like a kind of weird warped family, can't they? Like a lot of kind of maybe suitable or unsuitable parental figures, kind of a lot of kind of incestuous relationships, both happy and unhappy, a lot of resentment, a hell of a lot of resentments around status, money itself, workload, pressures, sales targets, etc., all of which comes up in Empty Orchestra. So that reminded me of a period in my life which I have mixed memories of, basically, which, I have happy memories of aspects of it, I have unhappy memories of other aspects, but it brought that back a lot vividly. But the karaoke conceit really, it does transform it into kind of a musical episode, and it kind of, and then they use the songs sung to illustrate aspects of the plot and ironies of the plot and known to one or more of the characters. And it's I actually read on, I think it was one of the commentaries, they said that they were, in a sense, they were disappointed that they weren't able to make it completely that. They talked at an early stage about they wanted the only dialogue in this to be the karaoke songs sung. And that was just a bit much, basically. They just couldn't, they could, I guess they could work out a version of that episode, but it wasn't quite the version they wanted to make, So they ended up doing something a tiny bit more conventional. Although I think it's still quite startlingly unconventional, really. But the reason I was sort of saying I justify this before is, I think this episode was one of the first ones, because you were talking about in the 5th season, where you get this episode where there's basically nothing either supernatural or overtly sinister going on, or very little. I think this was one of their earlier moments where a lot of people saw this one and kind of went, it was all right. They kind of shrugged it off. They kind of, and then obviously a lot of people were actively disappointed as well, because it was coming after the Riddle of the Sphinx, it was coming after the Devil of Christmas, it was coming after even as you say, like the Bill. It was coming after these episodes in which grand, dramatic, violent stuff was happening. And although in this there are dramatic things happening, there's there's an affair being had, there's jobs being gained and lost, there's love being sought and found in one of the sort of more overtly happy endings in Inside Number 9, for some characters anyway. Did you? Because obviously I've chosen this one and you didn't, but do you see some of that? But both, do you see some of that quality in it? But do you also see why other people might have been a bit underwhelmed?
Yeah, I do. I see both sides of that, actually, because I was watching Series 3 full in the knowledge that you had said your favourite episode ever was during Season 3. And I have to confess, I watched Empty Orchestra, and I was like, I've just seen Empty Orchestra. That's okay, isn't it? And you came back with, that's the one. That's my favourite ever episode.
I know, I enjoyed that. I really enjoyed that.
And I was ever so slightly surprised, but I can see a lot of reasons for that. Having rewatched it again, I did feel a bit like with this episode, as you say, the idea that their original conceit may well have been to do it all through song. And so, where are we now? We're 2017, aren't we? So we're a fair few years after the Once More with Feeling Buffy episode.
I knew you were going to bring that
up. At this stage. Ladies and gentlemen, this is the first of many Buffy the Vampire Slayer references.
You've just made it a stealth Buffy podcast, didn't you?
I nearly mentioned the body a moment, actually, when you were talking about the 12 Days of Christine.
Oh, yeah.
But so I think that would have made a very strong, very interesting conceit. The idea of there being a hard of hearing person who they were sometimes subtitling and having characters doing sign language, also very, very interesting. And I feel like really committing to one of those on its own would have been a really strong episode, but it felt like it was a little bit two or more ideas that they weren't fully 100% committed to.
I can get that. Yeah, I can see that.
But like you say, there are amazing moments. I mean, the performance of I Know Him So Well does exactly that, does exactly what Once More With Feeling does incredibly well, which is genuine narrative and emotional drama that moves the story along. They're not just singing a song in the middle of a musical because it's time for a song. They're singing something where their characters' aspirations and loves and attitudes change, and you visibly see them change. I mean, there's that wonderful moment where Tamsin Outhwaite realises or thinks she knows that it's Fran that's getting the sack.
I'm glad you brought that moment up, yeah.
When Reece Shearsmith does this incredibly elaborate pointing to her back.
Yeah.
But then Tamsin Outhwaite comes back and sings the next verse of the song with a sudden renewed, yes, I've won. This is my turn now. And it's very clever having that little turn in there, and being able to enjoy those characters actually expressing the narrative through the songs that they're doing. And I know at this point you'll probably want to mention Since You've Been Gone in a Brummie accent.
You read my mind. I'll never be able to say that song again without thinking of it in a Brummie accent, thanks to Steve Pemberton. I also, me and my friend Dean have a almost lifelong fondness for wham rap, so that's and I mean the racial, the neatly done racial politics of a black actor singing wham rap dressed as Michael Jackson. There's a lot tied up there.
That's there's some levels there.
Yeah, no, I really enjoyed that. And even just things like the kind of it's not central to the plot, but the kind of what's it like pill roulette thing that they do near the beginning, where you kind of you're not sure if any of these characters are in altered chemical states or not, throughout the episode, and turns out they weren't, but it's kind of
they weren't, and actually that's quite interesting because when that comes up, you kind of think, oh, here it is, here's the conceit. One of them's going to be on Viagra, one of them's gonna be on diarrhea tablets or laxatives, and you think, oh well, that's going to be it. They're all stuck in a room, but they're all going to be at different levels of intoxication, and actually it's just thrown away. Nah, they were all Tic Tacs.
I really like the I mean, this. Of all the bits of this podcast, this could easily turn into. I really like the bit where, because in my case, I just do like so much of it. But I really like the way the episode ends. Actually, with the revelation of Shearsmith's cheating, but the way it ends on this elated moment where it's kind of like we were talking about pure tragedy before in the Riddle of the Sphinx. Is this getting to kind of the edge of pure comedy in the sort of classical sense, where you end with this party, with this, the party kicks up a notch, and you kind of, that girl comes into the booth with the next party, who's got a more professional singing voice than the actors we've heard thus far. So she slightly artificially, she sort of raises the spirit a bit. She makes it sound more like a conventional outro, and it kind of, and you end up with a lot of the the virtuous characters, or at least the redeemable characters, celebrating, and you just kind of you slowly pull out through the crowd as the crowd sort of intensifies and covers them all, and I just to that uplifting kind of power pop of, is it Titanium, I just love it. I'd love it. I really, this is the bit where I'll stop pretending I'm analytical, and I'll just be some bits of television you just love. But I've watched it many times as well. It's not something that I sort of fondly remembered and rewatched this and went, yeah, it's still good. It's comfort viewing for me, actually. I really love this episode.
Yeah, there's an interesting thing you've said there about the comedy and tragedy, because actually that makes me realise there's something Shakespearean about that as well, in terms of ending something like A Midsummer Night's Dream, where everything ties up in the end, or ending The Tempest, where the bad guys get their comeuppance and arguably the good guys are going to be fine and get to celebrate. And ending with a song and a dance. It's it's the old old tradition at the Globe for all of the actors to then come out and close the show with an uplifting dance and send you out into the night. And I do wonder if there's an element of that going on there as well, where they're following classical structures, not rigidly, but they're following them again and kind of using them with great aplomb and energy.
Yeah, I agree. Well, we'll take a brief break there because we've done quite a sweep through turn number 9 there, but we will be coming back to discuss a couple of our remaining picks, and also just to talk a little bit about the sort of the latest direction of the series and its possible future. But we'll see you in a sec.
Okay.
Welcome back. So, John, we obviously discussed quite a few of our favourite picks now, and I'd like to turn to another one of yours. This is again from season 3, our last one from season 3. So this is Diddle, Diddle, Dumpling. And why did you select this one?
A lot of reasons, actually. I had kind of a revelation after watching this, and we were obviously having a bit of back and forth chatting at the time. And I think this is the first time it occurred to me, it's like a Raymond Carver short story. And I realised, and I first noticed that as an influence, and I think that's it's one that I've noticed more and more since then. That idea of something being quite realistic, quite domestic, maybe quite low key, but there's something slightly odd, there's something slightly off kilter going on. And then at the end of it, there's actually a revelation that it all has a meaning and it all has a kind of real world, emotional purpose. So I think I saw that influence there first of all, and also the cinematography of it is wonderful. I mean, it's we have already mentioned to each other that it's quite Kubrickian.
Which they seem to be aware of themselves.
Yeah. I mean, how could you not? It's once you've noticed the similarities with The Shining, I think it's impossible to get away from it. From a small child playing on a patterned carpet and very very slow, steady camera moves to
symmetry, etc.
Yeah, symmetry, and then the final shot being kind of a close up on an old photograph, basically. So again, I just, I love the influences that are in there. So again, you know that they're enjoying yourself, and that kind of makes you enjoy it the more because you know that they're riffing on something that they clearly love. I think this is probably a good point as well to mention. So the director of this one, Guillermo Morales, has actually directed quite a few of our favourite ones. So as well as this, as well as Diddle to the Dumpling, he directed 12 Days of Christine and The Riddle of the Sphinx as well. So I think it's interesting. It's obviously they've been working with the same people all along, but I think it's quite interesting that three of those have been three of our favourites have been directed by the same person. He's clearly got a very strong visual eye and a love of cinema and that kind of aesthetic that he uses very well.
That is interesting because we are still sort of moving. I think if anything, last decade saw a slow move towards a sort of more recognised auteurism in TV directing, didn't it? You started seeing a lot with a lot of the bigger shows like Breaking Bad and Game of Thrones. You started getting, I mean, not still not so the average person in the street would know them, but so that connoisseurs of television started talking more about the directors of particular episodes, particularly like big event episodes, things like that.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's very much, from The Sopranos onwards, really, isn't it? That's kind of brought in The Sopranos and The Wire, and your kind of big auteur showrunners, which obviously has happened here in terms of Doctor Who and the Doctor Who reboot, and it being all about Russell T Davies, and there's a consistency with the directors they have there as well. So I think it's just kind of worth giving a little nod to the director and the lovely work on this. I also think, again, in terms of how it subverts expectations, they've got to the point where they're very self-assured and they're very confident in what it is they're doing. So confident, in fact, that they can make a joke about the door being number 22 at the very beginning, and that's a joke for us. The joke is, here is the credit sequence, here is the point where we would reveal what the number 9 was, and instead I'm going to shut a door that is number 22, and you're going to go, huh? Hang on, what? And then you're going to zoom in on a shoe.
Yeah.
And it's size 9, and that moment's genuinely wonderful, I think.
Well, it's the same. I can't remember if it's series 3 or 4, but the episode rewatched just last night. The one with the sort of Memento-esque time jumps, where it goes back in 10-minute segments. The sort of gag at the end of that is that house was not number 9, but she turns a 6 upside down to make it 9, so that an assassination plot will go differently. So they're definitely in the phase of being able to laugh at the format itself.
Yeah. So I think the other things. Again, it's one of those episodes, in a way that we've touched on with The Last Days of Christine and me mentioning Love's Great Adventure. I think it's one of those domestic, everyday. Sometimes being a human being is really, really hard, and here's why. Here's just a few of the things that could make life as a human being really, really difficult, and it's hard for all of them, and it's. They're both grieving, and it's clearly affected him in a very deep psychological way. But also, Keeley Hawes, who's wonderful, is trying to deal with it, is trying to keep everything together. And actually, I think Steve Pemberton in this is wonderful. It's a lovely little underplayed performance as the guy who's trying to get him back into being a sales rep.
And he's maybe a little bit interested in her as well. There's that moment, the hand touch.
But also in him, in his understanding and his reaction to Reece Shearsmith telling the whole story about the shoe, and the way that he is kind of, he's nodding and he's playing along with him, but you can see behind his eyes he's like, this is very, very bad. This is very bad. This is not at all normal. So then you get Matthew Bainton who pops up in a again, quite small role, for a small but important role, which gives me an opportunity to give a shout out to the other finest comedy show of the last 20 years, which is, of course, Horrible Histories. It's genuinely brilliant. It's one of the best sketch shows ever written. It's phenomenal. And he's wonderful in this, and Matthew Bateson, again, really underplaying it. Playing it very, very subtly. But there's a moment when the shoes come back together, or the shoe that he's brought is put together with the shoe that Reece Shearsmith has found, and you can see as you look inside that they're both size 9, obviously, but they're slightly different colouring on the number 9 itself. So you've got this tiny little clue that it's maybe not all that it seems, and it's those little details and those little art department details. And again, I think it's worth saying how much the art department must contribute to this series, because it's everything aesthetically is so wonderfully put together. But it's lovely little touches like that, where one of the shoes is clearly a little bit more worn than the other one, and that kind of gives you a tiny indication as to again, all is not as it at first appears. But also, I just think, it's just another beautiful, heartbreaking performance. I think it's really is a way of dealing with grief and loss and pain that slowly unfolds itself over 28 or so minutes. But then, of course, it's taken to a much, much more extreme conclusion at the end of that.
Yeah, I want to ask you about the ending actually, because I've read a different interpretation of the ending which I think is valid, but I just want to see if you chimed with it. But before that, I just wanted to say I think one of the things I like about this episode is it's doing that thing again of taking what you might call their more Royston Vasey side and kind of because you've seen Shearsmith particularly, but you've seen them all play these characters who are obsessives. You've seen them play these characters who are dangerously, I guess, like commodity obsessed. Both in League of Gentlemen, but also in Psychoville, there are characters who are obsessed with. There's one woman played by Dawn French who's obsessed with a doll, thinking it to be a real baby. There's a character who's an obsessive collector of toys who is slightly more self-aware and realizes that his obsession with toys is a marker for something else. For dealing with deeper things. There's that kind of thing that they've gone to, and this feels like that kind of bringing that to the suburbs almost, doesn't it? It feels like bringing it to a slightly more sober real world, and a lower key Reece Shearsmith performance, but one that's always on the edge of reminding you of some of his more unhinged, dangerous, desperate characters. And I mentioned Jeff from League of Gentlemen already. That obviously he's a world and again class away from that kind of character, but that unhinged desperation and inability to kind of stick to the polite script of life is kind of creeping in there, isn't it?
It does creep in there, and I think that's where my Raymond Carver comparison comes in, because it is suburban. It is just ordinary life. It is very domestic, very suburban existence that a lot of those Carver stories have before they then twist, and then before they show you a different perspective and they show you that something else is going on. Wonderfully nuanced performance here. It's it's the bit where he switches, where they're sat at the table and he says, well, I've got a project on, and you see how far it's gone that he is now obsessed with this shoe and with finding the owner of this shoe.
There's something about unemployment there as well, isn't there? There's something wrapped in there as well as the bereavement that's the bigger point of the episode.
Yeah, absolutely. There's something about him no longer working or being able to work or even wanting to work. And again, there's this interesting switch where, up to that point in the beginning, he's the house husband and we see him hoovering and he's doing all the cooking. But then when he goes back to work, suddenly it seems to switch that he's the one coming home in a suit and she's the one who's there looking after the child. And then obviously it flips again and it goes back the other way again. So again, I think there's an interesting gender and class dynamic thing going on there as well.
It's almost like pointing out that the sort of more traditional family patriarchal kind of structures are reassuring, but they're often just skin deep, basically, isn't it? I think it's...
Yeah, I'll buy that. I'll buy that. I'll buy that for $1. That sounds about right.
That was a pretentious way to put it. But that kind of when they're restored, when there's more traditional structures and ways of coping with life are restored, it can put things back on track on a surface level, and sometimes more profoundly. But it's not necessarily, there's stuff going on still behind his eyes. When his daughter sings that song to him, he's not fixed.
Yeah, and that's a lovely moment as well. I mean, that's just that pause, that beautifully timed pause between her finishing the song and him bursting into a round of applause is, the amount of tension in that, because you now know exactly what's going on. And again, I mean, that's basically the reveal, isn't it? The reveal is basically, in that song is Diddle, Dumpling, my son John. So that's kind of giving you everything you need to do, and doing it in a less overt way than just chucking it into the narrative and chucking it into the script, chucking it in like that's that's what TV writers do, isn't it? Really, they just chuck the stuff in.
It's interesting, I was talking about the ending. I was listening to, because this is one of the ones that the commentary track exists from Shearsmith and Pemberton, and I think the clear implication at the end of the episode is that Shearsmith's character has done harm to Matthew Bainton's character, to her old college friend, right down to being covered in blood, etc., and police sirens approaching. He does have that line about these things need, like these disunited things need to be together again, like this kind of thing, in which he must be referring not only to the shoe, obviously, but also to his daughter. Now we know his surviving daughter, one of twins. I think I thought this on first reading, there is the clear possibility, at least there, that he has also done something harmful to his remaining daughter. Shearsmith and Pemberton themselves seemed somewhat taken aback by that interpretation, which I thought was really interesting. They seemed not to have intended that, but I think it totally works, and that line sounds like a sinister line that someone who's just done something bad to the remaining daughter would say. So it's interesting that they don't seem to have got that about their own work, you know.
That's interesting. No, I'd not got that at all. I hadn't gone down that route. I think there's the final scene. There's enough of a conversation about him going to visit Matthew Bainton's character and how there was a struggle because he refused to give back the one real shoe that he's now taken from him. Because at that point, we obviously know that, you know, a brand new pair of shoes has been bought in order for Matthew Bainton to pretend that he owns one of them.
Yeah.
But Reece Shearsmith has gone back for the real shoe. He's gone back to reclaim it, and he wouldn't give it to him, and therefore there was a struggle. I'm slightly taken aback by that. It makes sense that interpretation would be there, but it's not one that I came across. I felt it was because, again, the obsession here is more about it's about grieving loss and how that's made him unhinged. But I never got the sense that he would harm the remaining child because of the loss of that grief, because actually that would seem to be counterproductive to his own sorrow in some way.
Well, except for that line where he's you know, you maybe think that his illness has now switched to the focus on things being united, you know.
Yeah.
So obviously he can't bring one daughter back from the dead, but
yeah,
he can fix it the other way, if you see what I mean.
Yeah.
But I don't know. I say it's interesting that they don't seem to have intended that, and it's interesting that the episode provides room for it.
Yeah, absolutely it is, and I'm sure there's numerous other examples where, you know, as soon as you put something out in front of an audience, it's gone. You can't, you have no control over it anymore, and it will be interpreted in ways that you didn't intend and perhaps don't want it to be interpreted. I think that's all art, really, isn't it? Once you've let it go, it's no longer yours, and you know, you do the best you can to make your intention clear, or you are intentionally ambiguous, perhaps.
Yeah, and sometimes it does just seems to end up there, you know.
Yeah, that's very interesting that they hadn't conceived of that either, actually.
Yeah, it's almost like they have areas of horror which they don't consider worthy of inclusion or you know, appropriate for inclusion, but their fans are, you know, able to provide the fringe to that, you know. Moving on to your also a choice of yours, Bernie Clifton's Dressing Room. This is we're going to series 4 now, so I think we're talking to 2018. I think. January
2018. They said
January 2018. Yeah. I know a lot of people who like this one, actually. My brother's a big fan of this one, and I remember some people telling me they're impressed with this one. Another perhaps less aggressively violent and unpleasant episode. Why do you like this one, John?
There's some of its personal aspects as well. Having done a bit of comedy in a double act many years ago, there's something about that dynamic between two people who start off doing something fundamentally for a laugh and fundamentally to make each other laugh, and it can be enjoyable, and then it can go somewhere else, and it can go in a different direction, and that dynamic can shift, and the way that it shifts can be incredibly destructive or incredibly painful. You know, we're talking about Pete and Dud here, aren't we? And you know, numerous comedy double acts where tragedy has befallen one of them, or their inner demons have got the better of them.
Platonic breakups, I suppose, are just a big and perhaps slightly under-examined part of human life. Well, not under-examined, but sort of slightly undervalued part of human lives.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's very true, actually. And I just found this episode, again, incredibly touching, incredibly moving, also incredibly funny. And one of the levels they're working on here is obviously the idea of old school variety entertainment and what is its place in the world now. And I think they have very much got one eye on, I know you mentioned earlier, their lack of political correctness, or their lack of concern for political correctness. And I think, in a way, I can't tell if they're criticising that or if they're saying something about that, but certainly there are, right there when they're running through their early sketches, there's a lot of, oh, we can't do that anymore. You're not allowed to do that anymore.
Yeah, and they actually make veiled reference to a Psychoville scene as well. In that one of them, Shearsmith's character refers to a bit he did where he was playing Tina Turner, with 2 ping pong balls for eyes. That happens. It's a grotesque moment anyway, but even in context, but it happens in Psychoville, I think series 2. And that's one of those moments, a bit like Little Britain, where it's long ago, but it's probably not long enough ago to excuse it. You know what I mean? And that's in their career. That's indelible. That's in their career. They have made a form of peace with that, I think. But it also something when the League of Gentlemen special came out in 2017. There were elements of I'm thinking about characters like Barbara the cab driver, things like that. Where they appeared to be almost aggressively not backing down on some of the things that they are now very out of fashion about their comedy, put it that way. I'm thinking in terms of trans issues, things like that. There seem to be elements of the way they'd written Barbara in that special where they were essentially giving a fairly polite middle finger to you might say kind of woke critics, basically. And that's interesting, and that's kind of beyond our purview today, but I think it's interesting that they kind of in portraying this sort of old school variety double act in this episode, and making them a writing and performing partnership. But obviously, they've got their biographies in mind there, haven't they? Obviously, at least partly. They're kind of portraying themselves as part of that lineage, but they're also maybe distancing themselves from it a little bit. There's a little bit of like, well, we have affection for this, but we're not that. We were never that.
Yeah.
But at the same time, they did start in sketch comedy, and a lot of the kind of you can imagine in a different world, Pemberton and Shearsmith would have been unsuccessful, and as younger men, and it would have come back together to do, some of the obscure league sketches and things like that,
Yeah, exactly. It's a very compelling dynamic, and it's talking about creativity and creative partnerships, and what you owe each other, and the crux of the issue is that until there's the reveal that Steve Pemberton's actually passed away, the idea all the way through is that Reece Shearsmith is doing this for him. He's doing this as an act of charity. He doesn't really want to, but he's now so guilty about where Steve Pemberton's character has ended up that this is all he can do. All he can give him is to revive cheese and crackers. And there are these lovely moments, and the fact that they're doing it all in a church hall, and they're doing it all by they have a big basket of props and costumes. And also, I think it's worth saying as well that this is yet another episode where we can say that they're behind the scenes, behind the curtain. The Understudy is behind the scenes. This is all about them rehearsing behind the scenes. Countless of the television episodes are about what goes on behind the cameras.
Or when the cameras are switched off in the breaks in between. Intended material.
Yeah, so this falls very nicely into that category of looking at the artists as well as the art, taking a very close look at the human beings who create art, who write, who devise things in a really interesting way. And also it's series 4, so it's pretty much not really there, I guess. But, obviously after the League of Gentlemen was so huge, but then they kind of went in different directions, and Mark Gatiss became arguably more successful or had more mainstream success in terms of co-creating Sherlock and becoming heavily involved in Doctor Who and doing a lot of really high profile stage and screen stuff. And it kind of, I guess it was a bit like the band after New Order split up and they called themselves the Other Two. It's you can interpret it a little bit like that in terms of well here's a double act, which is, as you say, what they may well have been at one point or may well now have become. Because they're no longer a threesome, and I wonder how much of that is there. What I was going to say actually is I noticed I did start rewatching some League of Gentlemen recently, and actually if you rewatch it now on the iPlayer, before you start, you get a warning that says, I'm paraphrasing now, this program reflects ideas and attitudes of the time.
I see. I knew they were talking about doing that. I didn't know if they'd done that or not. Yeah.
Yeah. So I don't know if there's been any actual edits. That there lots of these that were talked about earlier in the year about various programs being changed and faulty towers getting taken down and put back up, etc.
I don't think you could edit around Papa Lazarou, could you? You'd have to excise that episode.
Exactly. But there's definitely a clear caveat there now from the BBC before you can watch that. And in actual fact, as I've mentioned to you already, in the referee episode, there's actually, you get a notification that it's been edited since broadcast, and then goes on to say there are many reasons why something could be edited for legal taste or etc reasons. So they're not immune. They're not immune to the idea that they are creating work within this world, within a rapidly changing world.
Yeah.
And that must be quite hard.
Yeah. Well, and also on a more human on an equally human level, that this is that interesting thing, isn't it, where performers who you could say similar about Steve Coogan, for example, like performers who were playing older characters as younger men are now aging into the stage where they can play these characters without makeup, basically. That you can imagine them playing these two characters in Bernie Clifton's dressing room in the league with heavy makeup and aging makeup, and with a younger man's perception of how that might go, and how that stage of life might be reached. And but they're now playing it where it is a believable stage of life for them. It's a bullet dodged in a sense, but it's they'll know people who have relationships like that and had partnerships that didn't work out and had shows that didn't work out and have grown estranged and bitter and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a really good point, actually, and certainly I've had that thought that the last Partridge series this time works particularly well because he's now the right age. He's now Alan Partridge's age, and that comes across very beautifully. And yeah, I think that's a really nice thought, actually, that they're growing into these parts and they're growing into these characters and they're being able to explore them fully. And also, they've just had more life experience now, haven't they? I mean, how many of these episodes, have clearly come from a place of heartbreak or turmoil, or they're all about failing relationships and grief and people betraying each other fundamentally. I mean, it would take an entire Venn diagram, but I suspect there is a fairly large central section of Inside Number 9. I mean, the old saying that all art is about sex, death, or art. I think it's all Inside Number 9 is either about being backstage, being betrayed, or no, that's probably it.
Yeah, and television. Yeah.
We'll class backstage as that. Backstage and betrayed. That's what it should be called.
It's a good episode title. I like that one. I think it's nice also for us to get a bit of dancing in there as well, because we talk about music and the fact that they do that lovely dance towards the end where it's kind of riffing on those kind of Laurel and Hardy, Morecambe and Wise kind of iconic dances, but it's just really sweetly done as well, isn't it? And this whole episode is just obviously has dark. I mean, the whole reason it works is it has so many dark currents to it, like the loss and the betrayal and the alcoholism and everything. But it's just sweet and forgiving, isn't it? It's just so. It's like it's the sort of reconciliation I guess some people can only get at funerals, basically.
Yeah, absolutely, and it is sweet and it is very touching and very humane as well. I mean, I think you can say that about a lot of Inside Number 9. Some of them are very inhumane in kind of their cruelty or their shock factor, but some of them are just so humane in their worldview, and I think this is one of those. The dancing, that's interesting actually, because obviously they do the very much Bring Me Sunshine riff at the end, but I remember mentioning to you that the dance that they do at the end of Death No More, what's that one called with Clara in it?
Death Be
Not Proud. Death Be Not Proud. That there's
with just Clara in it. I'm going to let that go. It makes us sound like 10-year-olds,
You got there, though. You knew who I meant.
Yeah, I certainly did, yes.
Sorry, Jenna Conwood. You're so much more than that. But at the end of that, when you have the son and the mother, and they do this dance that perhaps they used to do together, etc. And it's kind of faraway footage again, like it's a security camera, which is a conceit they've used a few times. And but you can feel through the screen that's Reece Shearsmith and Steve Pemberton having a laugh. And I think there are still fundamentally those moments that you get in those episodes where it's just two mates dicking about trying to make each other laugh, which I think is at the core of everything they do. It's sometimes hard to see in some of the more serious and more intense episodes, but yeah, those lovely little moments where they just do a dance at the end and pull some funny faces. It kind of brings them back home.
I'm sure the outtakes of Inside Number 9 are glorious. I don't know if any of the DVDs have come packaged with that stuff, but that'd be fun. I hope that makes its way online at some point. I just wanted to mention, just before we move on to our penultimate episode that we're talking about, what this brought up to me. We talked a little bit about their relationship with their own careers. Do you remember when I was messaging you about this earlier in the week? I was saying that this kind of British comedy, like what you might call like British, and I hope the quote marks are understood here, but the quote unquote smart British comedy has this complicated engaging with lowbrow British comedy. And it has this kind of... I was talking to you about extras, and the way, particularly the way Series 2 of Extras uses When the Whistle Blows as this kind of almost like voodoo doll that Ricky Gervais puts all his kind of snobberies and genuine valid criticisms and beliefs and insecurities about his own comedy into. And also, it's tied up with like British comedy history as well, and kind of the sort of comedy you grow up with when you talk about men of that age. I think this has a bit of that. This has a bit of that spice, doesn't it? And as you say, some of that might be about the sort of rapidly changing cultural world, as you say, that they're aware of. It's interesting. I think you can tie them together a bit. Yeah, it is. It's. I think it's more noticeable with them because it's so varied. Because you've got countless opportunities to touch on different genres and different things. But yeah, I think you're right, and I mean, maybe I'm wrong, but again, I think maybe you can bring class into that, and you can bring the lack of Oxbridge education in, which shouldn't be as big a deal as it is. But come on, let's be honest. It's you will frankly astonish yourself when you realise that numerous names in the British comedy circuit are Oxbridge that you didn't really think they are, and how pervasive I think it still is. Yeah, Mitchell and Webb are an obvious example. Exactly. Yeah. But that's not them. And I'll give a shout out to Bretton Hall here, which is the university come drama school in Wakefield that they all attended, which I think is where they met. And they've gone to a not necessarily flashy, high profile institution there. And I mean, how much of that gives you a chip on your shoulder if you actually go into that industry where you're then going to perhaps meet a lot of snobbery from various Oxbridge elites, perhaps. I'm not saying that's everyone in there, but that's got to rub off on you somewhere, I think. And I wonder if that manifests itself in this treading the line between high and lowbrow and saying, look, we know our Shakespeare, but we can also pull funny faces and make people laugh with wigs and I don't know, fart noises. Are there fart noises in Inside Number 9? I'm sure there are. There must be. There must be. We'll track them down. Be. That's the next podcast. I'll go through it with a fine tooth comb. No, I'm submitting my PhD application as we speak. Scatological noises in British TV comedy, 2001 to 2019. Wonderful. I'll link to that in the show notes as well. So moving on to my final choice, because the last one we're going to talk about is a joint decision, basically, based on what we already had on the slate. So I also in Series 4, To Have and To Hold, this is the one, if you remember it, probably the best way to refer to this in shorthand really is the Fritzl one, isn't it? Let's face it. Which is, to be honest, is not really a
something you want to use to describe anything.
To describe what we used to call light entertainment.
The Fritzl one.
Yeah, it's the horror of the domestic. This one, isn't it? I mean, it really. I mean, some of these have touched on that kind of thing already, but it's you've got Steve Pemberton playing this guy in a middle-aged, seemingly very stilted kind of unhappy marriage. You've got him and his wife who seem to be to love each other, but to be at odds in some respects, have grown apart. Maybe you've got an awkward scene fairly early on of them trying to inject sort of excitement into their sex lives, which is cringy, darkly funny, but cringy and awkward in the way that I imagine most of that, a lot of that stuff really is. And then
I don't know what you're talking about. I find that incredibly hot, that scene.
Yeah, well, yeah. I mean, yeah. I may edit that bit, and I may not. I'll see how the mood takes me. But you were talking about those moments of rupture in drama, weren't you? Where everything changes all at once, and your perception shift. And obviously, the big moment in this is more so than any subsequent twist, really. Although there are ones. Is in roughly the middle of the episode, isn't it? Where you have that scene where he goes down to the basement and reveals that carefully hidden door and compartment, and you get that horrible. And again, this might be second to the Devil Christmas, actually. Just that one that was shot from quite far away, where you just see that arm raised towards him. I don't know if you can see if it's manacled in the shot. I can't remember, but it's this like emaciated looking arm coming out of the dark, just sort of beseechingly at him, and you have no idea about the wider context there, but you may be, based on, as I say, news stories in recent decades, you maybe are starting to put together some of that stuff already. And obviously it turns out that he's been keeping this woman prisoner in the basement, and it turns out toward at the end of the episode that she has a kid, and it's kind of this. I definitely wouldn't say this qualifies as happy ending, but it's got that kind of. The more innocent characters get their freedom as much as they'll ever experience, I guess. Pemberton gets his comeuppance, certainly. I don't know how much I have to say about this one, really. I mean, there's certainly things I relate to in terms of, how terrifyingly trapping domestic situations can feel if they're not right, things like that. But obviously it's far without my experience of any of this sort of stuff, but I think there's just something, if you're going to draw on real life news stories and ideas, real life situations for story ideas, the Fritzl case is probably one of the most truly horrific, in its own way, probably as horrific as something like the Shipman murders, like that you can draw on, and they do so really effectively here. But they do it by having that slow lead in where you get to know the couple, at least the surface level of Pemberton, and you get to know her, and it makes it so much more horribly relatable is maybe a bit of a stretch, but kind of these are it's just that the old banality of evil thing, isn't it? Just people do this stuff, not people, just people.
Yeah, absolutely. And also, I think what's interesting there is that when the twist does come, it's not only a twist that kind of reveals the situation is far worse than he thought it was. It's where you see Steve Pemberton change, because he's two different people. He's the person he is with his wife and his domestic setting is pretty benign, but then in that very moment when he opens the door and the hand extends, like you just get that line where he's unbuckling his belt saying, "Try not to spill it this time."
Yeah,
and that's
a horrible innuendo as well.
He's suddenly just completely different. He's a monster now, and we can see that. And he's had that monstrous face hidden under a superficial visage, and I guess that's also a comment on on the real life situation about how not only is evil banal, but because it hides in plain sight. And I think that is very skillfully handled, and it's obviously a very difficult subject to tackle. And again, I guess this is one of the episodes where we kind of say, well, what is it you're making here? Because I don't think I can call this comedy, really.
Yeah. It's another one of those ones where everyone who watches it should get counselling afterwards, really, because it's kind of, it just brings up so many like tiny, like as I say, tiny relatable things, but the bigger picture is so outlandishly horrific that it's kind of it. But again, it's like that boiling a frog thing I was saying. Because most viewers could probably find the tiny things in it relatable, or at least to an extent, or will have been in a situation where they find it relatable, the whole big picture, which otherwise would be you couldn't put yourself in. Because I think a lot of people, when they read about the Fritzl case, they struggled with it, and some of what they struggled with was, and I'm sort of choosing my words carefully here, some of what people struggled with was the dark comedy of the situation. You know what I mean? The fact that the Fritzl case was almost unbelievable, and it was domestic and kind of farcical. You know what I mean? Like, in a really dark sense. The idea of these two parallel lives contained within the same building, it's mad. It's madness.
Yeah, I mean, and it's Greek tragedy again, isn't it? It's taking something to such an extreme that we, most of us, fortunately, don't feel like that is something we have or will ever encounter in our day-to-day lives, and therefore it's not part of our experience. It's not part of our worldview. So when that stuff happens, in a way, you reevaluate humanity, you reevaluate yourself. It's I think there's a slight difference between massive events, wars, for example. It's and the evil and lack of humanity contained within that. But when it's one very specific human being, one very specific example, and I think that's partly the fascination with serial killers, isn't it? And obviously you've got them riffing on that in the the Clara episode. I can't remember the name of it. But for Love Nor Money, Death Be Not Proud. So you've got them, riffing on their knowledge of serial killers in that episode as well. And I think there is a morbid fascination that we have with it for that reason, because it shows us that the very worst in humanity is there. And to an extent you could say that that ties nicely onto Thinking Out Loud, where it's those different aspects of our psyche, of humanity, are within us. It's it's a truism that we are all multifaceted, and some of those facets are not pleasant, and some of those facets don't hold the same morality or principles as maybe we would like to believe. So I think that's an interesting debate they're having there. I was just looking. I think what's interesting as well is the Fritzl case was 2008, I think.
That long ago? Wow.
I think it was when it came out. But then, of course, you had the film Room, which came out in 2015, which is the Lenny Abraham film from the Helen Donahue novel. Emma Donahue novel. That is exactly that. That is a character trapped in a room with a small child. Yeah. There's actually another lovely, really interesting, nuanced detail in this as well, though, and it's when Reece Shearsmith and his new wife come back at the end with a bottle of champagne, and they say, "Oh, we just wanted to say thanks, but also we really like your house. If you're ever thinking of selling it, will you please let us know first, because we'd be really interested." And of course, this is dramatic irony writ large now, because the audience know what's in the basement of that house, and it's a horrific thought that someone could unintentionally think, "Oh, that's a lovely house. I'd quite like to buy that," but really, really terrible things have happened there.
Yeah, and are continuing to happen.
Are continuing to happen there, yeah. And I think that's a really interesting little twist as well, where they're really showing the discrepancy between the private and the public, which they've already shown in Pemberton's character.
Well, and that's Death Be Not Proud as well, isn't it? Buying the murder house,
Yes,
that's a trope.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think feminist critics might pick up on the kind of the resolution of this one, or the non-resolution of this one, but the new state they find themselves in. Talk about Room, the kind of the new life that is forged after these kinds of situations. And in this one, it's very, again, the darker end of Tales of the Unexpected, where these two women seem to have formed a semi-familial relationship and use of the space, and they've got their own justice, presumably agreed justice, which has not involved the law. So you've got them continuing a deception, a double life, using the house to mask the new truth, which is the only thing they think they could do or want to do with this situation and this horror they've been left with. It's very I was saying it's not a happy ending. It's not really, is it, on any level? But it's there's complicated restorative justice happening there.
Yeah, I think it's that. It's restorative justice. It's poetic justice, isn't it? And that's maybe the best we can hope for in that kind of scenario.
Yeah, whether administered by society or not.
Yeah, exactly.
So that concludes me and John's personal choices, but we decided that to have a 9th episode to talk about, we'd kind of agree on one, and I think because neither of us picked it, we then thought that we did have a bit of conversation back and forth about, kind of which one we'd go for after that, but we realised that really one of the kind of almost inevitable one to at least talk about a little bit was the special that followed Series 4, which is called Deadline, and it's their Halloween special. And the reason we kind of had to talk about that really is because it was quite a big moment. Really, it was the biggest cultural impact. I think certainly in British culture, but also kind of wherever Inside Number 9 is watched abroad as a cult program. It had a big impact because it was an event. Really, it was more so than The Devil of Christmas, which was sort of nestled away in the schedules as a kind of minor delicacy. Deadline was promoted. The gimmick, as they promoted it, was that it would be a live TV event, which obviously happens occasionally, the way a lot of TV used to get produced, particularly in the sort of 50s, 60s, and now isn't, and is very rare. And Shearsmith and Pemberton did the promotional rounds of it. They knew what they were doing. They decided once they were going to do a live show, they knew what they wanted to do with it, and they made sure that a lot of people knew it was going to happen. This was October 2018, so just over 2 years ago. Do you remember, what was your experience of first watching this, John? Were you there on the night?
No, I wasn't at all. Again, this was during like a hiatus when I'd kind of stopped watching it, and I was aware that it was happening because, strangely, again, I'd watched a lot of season 4 and really enjoyed it, and then just dropped the ball and never got round to it, and certainly didn't watch it live.
Do you remember any kind of quote-unquote water cooler chat the next day? Do you remember people coming in and saying, did you see? Yeah,
there was, but I think due to the nature of it, that conversation can only go two ways, and it's, did you see Deadline last night? And if the answer is no, then that's the end of the conversation, because, Inside Number 9 fans are incredibly precious about conceding the twists and the spoilers. And if you say yes, you then have to check if anyone else in the room has seen it or is planning to see it, and then proceed with caution. So yes, I do. I remember it being a thing that I was aware of, that this kind of one-off broadcast was happening, but I just missed it at the time. And I'll come back to why I actually ended up finding that quite interesting, but I'll let you answer the same thing. Did you watch live?
I did. So I watched it in the flat with my friend Drew, who's been on this podcast before, and my friend Sam, and we were up for it. We sort of gathered specifically to do that, and we were having some drinks, and we were looking forward to it, and we were kind of nervous about it, for them, almost in a sympathetic way. So when, as anyone who's seen the episode knows, when around the 9-minute mark, the show, to now a fairly straightforward live show, starts to go wrong, sound starts to drop out, technical hitches seem to happen, the continuity announcer starts to make apologies, we were gutted for them. We were really, we thought it was a real shame, and then obviously the show starts to get replaced with Quiet Night In from Series 1. The sort of backup tape essentially starts to roll, and we stayed with it because we like Inside Number 9 a lot, and we watched it. And I think so. I'm not sure I make myself clever in retrospect than I am, but I think I, and probably them too, said something like, I think I said maybe though. I think it was that simple. I was just like, is this? I think I said something like, I'm not sure this is over. Which sounds like a line from Inside Number 9 itself. But I think it was either Sam or Drew who was watching the TV more attentively than me, and it was them who first saw the ghost. And I was like, and I think we all looked at each other like children. We were just kind of like, what on earth is happening? And we're 100% here for it. Because obviously, as anyone who's seen Deadline knows, it then goes on. It does various things after that, but it basically becomes a story of ghosts invading the live production itself, and it becomes a very cleverly meta thing about not just ghost stories, but about TV ghost events, and about you already referenced Ghostwatch earlier in the podcast about won't go into detail about that, but that's an early 90s TV event which has its own legacy in terms of convincing people that an unreal horror story was a real TV event, etc. And it goes through so many movements in terms of making that a unique TV event. So yeah, I loved it on the night. I thought it was an incredible experience. I'm really glad I caught it. And then I rewatched it the next day, and I had all those conversations where I basically had to stop talking to people very quickly when it turned out they hadn't seen it, and those who had seen it were just like, yeah, I know, oh my god, So yeah, what was the experience of watching it not live, knowing it had somewhat of a reputation?
Well, that's the thing. It's really interesting because I kind of knew something had happened. They'd done a live show. I think I had a vague idea that obviously it was going to be a bit like, the play that goes wrong, and something was going to break down, but that was obviously part of the conceit. However, again, like you, I'd love to say I was clever enough to have realised what was going on, but even watching it on the iPlayer, even watching it on a repeat several years later, when that sound first cuts out, it took me a little while, and I thought, oh, okay, that's what's going on. But the second time it went, I was actually like, is something actually wrong with my TV or with the iPlayer? And it's still, the conceit is so well done, so well executed.
They played us like a fiddle, didn't they? Whether you're an Inside Number 9 fan or not, anyone watching that would have had their own concerns about live TV, and they would have known how to play on those. Everyone would have had their expectations for how Inside Number 9 might play up to those, and they played on those very artfully as well.
They did as well. The other thought I had as well, because you going into it knowing a little bit of it, and obviously you're seeing the publicity still, which is the two of them in dark suits, so you know something else is going on. And the first 10 minutes where it's just that twee little story about a lost mobile phone, and Reece Shearsmith comes in with a slightly obtrusive camera on his bicycle helmet, it has to be said, but and also you're like, this is not what I thought it was. This is not what I thought it was going to be. It's like we're 10 minutes in, and they're still chatting about a lost mobile phone in a domestic setting, and is this? I can't. Surely this isn't the one. This isn't the one that made all the fuss. And
is this a rare dud? Is this going to be a dud?
Well, that's what kept going through my head. Is like, is this really the one that everyone got excited about, made the fuss about, and again, absolutely played me like a fiddle as well. So by the time you get to the proper grisliness and the real scares of it, and by the way, the idea of having Stephanie Cole in there, this old comedy actress
from Open All Hours, right?
From Open All Hours, who's appeared in all these very mainstream BBC sitcoms, and having her just do what she does there is extraordinary. And it is. I mean, like you mentioned, we both mentioned Ghostwatch there. It's. I remember that really, really vividly at the time. It made an enormous fuss, even though it wasn't a live show, even though it pretended to be a live show, but clearly it wasn't, and held a very similar conceit in terms of, we're going to do a live Ghostwatch show, but and then stuff starts to go wrong, so you're tricking people. It's it's the Orson Welles War of the Worlds effect, isn't it? It's doing something that really drags people in. And I'm almost certain they will have been influenced by that and will have seen that when it came out in the 90s. But it's just a genius idea. It's a genius idea of playing with the grammar and conceits of television, and I think what they're very clever at, what they're very good at doing, is giving their audience the trust and the belief that we all have a film grammar and a TV grammar, and even if we just think we're a passive television viewer, we know more than we think we know. We know more about what camera angles indicate. We know more about what incidental music means. We know all of these things, and we're more attuned to them than we think. And I think that's what they're very clever at, is playing that. And I think Deadline is the one, where they play us like fiddles the most proficiently. And also, as I've said, it contains one of my favourite lines, I think, which is where one of them says to Stephanie Cole, "It's not Black Mirror, it's."
This is more dark comedy twists,
Dark comedy and twists. It's lovely. I mean, how much more self-reverential do you need to be? It's glorious.
I think he does it while he's checking his phone.
Yeah,
it's just kind of like,
and that's in as well, because it brings in the whole Twitter thing as well, which is very interesting about their.
Yeah, of course, he genuinely live tweeted from the show, didn't he?
They're doing immediate feedback, and that immediate feedback loop. And actually, I don't think there's many shows that do that. I don't think there's many writers that admit that there is this correlation between the instantaneous reaction that people now get on social media. You spend months and months and months creating this, and it's broadcast many months later, but then it's that, I can't imagine having worked on something that hard and that long and to then just be looking at Twitter on the night it's broadcast and having how
oh my god, imagine
how dispiriting that must be. But the way that they deal with that gag, with that he's really Twitter obsessed, and Pemberton's just not bothered at all. I think
which I believe is real life as well, isn't it?
Okay.
Yeah, I read. I think it was Pemberton was talking to a panel after this was on, maybe at the BFI or something, and he was talking about how terrified he was, like walking out into that set because. And remember, this is a man who's done sold out Drury Lane shows and theatrical, like is no stranger to live performance, and he was saying, it's just like, what if I'm the guy who messes this up? What if I'm the guy who drops the ball on this, or diminishes it, and and it is something. I mean, I've got a mild critique of Deadline. Okay, so and it's not really. I like it, and it's kind of this is again coming down to the specific stuff that maybe scares you or affects you. The fact that it basically comes down to a sort of poltergeist kind of ancient disturbed burial ground, spirits invading, that kind of thing. All like borderline and seance time-esque kind of echoes here. That's kind of not really something. I mean, obviously, if I found myself in that situation in real life, I'd be very scared. But in terms of horror fiction, it's not really one of my things. It's not really. It doesn't really get under my skin. So, what I found the scariest, and this is where we come back to the messing around with TV as a medium specifically. Obviously, my highlight of Deadline is obviously the moment of realization that I'll never be able to get back. Although in another sense I'll always have that memory of seeing it for the first time. But is the bit that follows shortly after that, where the continuity announcer is still talking to you, still trying to reassure you, but you can hear she's getting more scared. There's no visual at all. It's just the test card or whatever, the emergency card, and you just hear her go, hello, is someone there? And you're suddenly like, you've got that voice that you used to being the voice of reassurance and kind of, oh, everything's still smooth, everything's going along, nothing to see here, and suddenly that voice is under threat, and it's kind of, but you still can't see it. And I was like, I think, you were talking about like maybe Empty Orchestra being a bit overstuffed for its own good, for example. I think Deadline ends up in that position. I think there's a bit too much going on, and it's kind of beyond that wonderful setup. I think I almost would have preferred like the focus after that to be on the continuity announcer, who you could then reveal that you'd stunt cast Maxine Peake or something like that. You could do something like that.
Yeah.
And I almost like the idea of the rest playing out with just the test card. So almost like you could do like a stealth radio play essentially. Like you've actually taken away the medium of television itself. But that's one of those criticisms where I just know they just did a different thing, right? And that's just me. That's me being maybe in the end slightly underwhelmed with the full product, But that's not really a criticism. It's just that would have played more into my own fears, and that would have got under my skin more, maybe.
Yeah. What do you make of the ending?
Do you mean? Yeah, there's a few on the. Do you mean,
the actual ending where we return to a quiet night in, and the last shot is them repeatedly being shot in the head, basically.
Well, I suppose it's that gearing up of disconcertion again, isn't it? That going back to Christine, it's that kind of unnerving you more and more. And I actually really like the cutting away from Shearsmith's, or Pemberton and then Shearsmith's death to their sort of, was it like one show appearance or whatever? The kind of talking about ghosts and not believing in ghosts, because I'm enough of a League fan and stuff to have heard them talk, on shows like that about their, their non-belief in the supernatural and stuff like that. So that was a nice thing, and then to wrench it back to, I mean, I suppose I like that ending if you put it that way, because I like my favourite aspects of this are the ghost, the literal ghost in the machine stuff. I like the idea of those spirits. I don't really like the idea of them running around a darkened studio and appearing to people. I like the idea of them having taken over the TV mechanism itself.
Yeah, absolutely. But it's weirdly crossing timelines, isn't it? It's you're watching an episode that has aired 4 series ago, and that you're. I'm not sure about the consistency, I guess, of what's happening there. I'm not entirely sure about the consistency of those two strands, those two timelines being pulled together.
Yeah, I see what you mean. I mean, it's interesting that the use of A Quiet Night In, which we didn't really talk about much because obviously we skimmed over season 1, but like apparently that was, I think you might have read this as well, John, but like that was the episode that they'd chosen, the BBC had genuinely chosen to be the backup episode if the live show had really gone wrong, but when it was early on in the conception, so they went with that. But someone was pointing out how clever it is that that's the episode where your visual attention is directed at the screen because it's largely silent. So obviously you've got those those big open like French windows and stuff, but so the space, what they did with it, the space works. And it's interesting as well because I was talking to you about watching it on the night. Me and the guys were enough Inside Number 9 fans that we were like, oh, we like Inside Number 9. This is also a good one. We have that knowledge of the show that this is a good one. We will therefore continue watching it for the other 3 minutes that they needed us to watch it for the gag to work. And it kind of. It's just so I like it basically. I think that works. Deadline is not one of my favourites, and I acknowledge its power as an event. For me, the subtler event is the Ghost of Christmas, basically the Devil of Christmas. Sorry, but I know why Deadline set everyone aflame, and I know why people love it, and it was quite something.
Yeah, I think just while we're touching on A Quiet Night In, actually, I think that was the first time I realised that it was something a bit different and something a bit special. So, you open the series with sardines, and you think, oh, that's very good. It's all in one room. It's all in one location. The idea is that they're, constrained by having all the action take place in one location. But then, they go somewhere else, and then the next episode, they're going to do an episode with no dialogue. It's kind of like, so the Oulipo literary movement, who, people like Georges Perec would set themselves the task of writing an entire novel without the letter E in it. It's, it's that kind of constraint which writers and artists have done for many, many years, where it's liberating for them to say, this is the constraint, this poem has to be 14 lines long, there may be no letter E in this, there may be the constraining of the artistic creative process, and I feel like that's something they've obviously found incredibly liberating with this, and obviously has worked very successfully because, as we say, we're talking about there being a 6th series, and in this day and age on the BBC with the state of the television industry, that's no mean feat at all to have something that you could argue is this niche, perhaps, that isn't a mainstream program to have that commitment for that long. I think proves that the writing and the conceit is incredibly strong, and I feel that obviously that is the first time I noticed that in A Quiet Night In, where I thought, okay, I see what they're going to do. They are going to give themselves a different hurdle each week. They're going to give themselves a different constraint, and I want to see how that is going to play out. Yeah. And also, as I know I've mentioned to you before, it just occurred to me in this rewatch that the fact that they've got Una Chaplin playing the woman in A Quiet Night In, they have Charlie Chaplin's granddaughter, great-granddaughter?
Granddaughter, I think. He was having kids till he was quite late, basically.
Yeah, he was indeed. So, they've got Charlie Chaplin's granddaughter in the silent episode. They're enjoying themselves on an industry level as much as I think they're enjoying themselves on a creative level.
Yeah, no, I agree. I've also just we'll wrap up in a second, but I just wanted to. I just realised, of course, that Deadline, of course, my slight underwhelming with the finished product of Deadline might just play into that thing we were talking about, where I'm not that into the series ending supernatural ones. Really, it might just fit that. I just wanted to. We deliberately mentioned when we were coming up with these favourites, John, that we didn't. Neither of us picked in the end any episodes from Series 5, which was the one that was on at the start of this year. It seems like an age ago, doesn't it? But was it sort of January, February 2020? I was thinking, I don't want to rubbish Series 5. I think there's loads of really good episodes. I think it's good. I think some of the reasons that I didn't pick things from it, they're varied really, but like when we talked about Riddle the Sphinx before, I was going to mention the episode Misdirection, which I watched with my mum last night. I hadn't seen it before, but I rewatched it last night. That's the magic one.
Yeah.
And I was thinking that Misdirection almost Misdirection is the first time I've caught them just doing something again to lesser effect. I think Misdirection, in my opinion, is Riddle the Sphinx and not as good.
Okay.
As a structure and as a kind of, I mean, it's even got the sort of like dark and stormy night, a visitor at your door kind of, it talks all of this. It's a bit more muddled. It's less unified in terms of setting and timescale than Riddle the Sphinx. It's, I think, with the best will in the world, I think the young actor in it is not as good as the actresses in Riddle the Sphinx. I think the plot itself, in terms of its like revelation of magic technique and stuff, is more showy and more kind of Sherlockian in the way that it shows off in that, but it's not as interesting as the stuff you learn about crosswords in it's. But what I mean, it's to praise the show, basically. That's the first time I've caught them doing that. Just doing this, because I'm a Star Trek fan. There's loads of things where there's just like episodes where this is a less good version of that one that you've seen 100 times already. This is the first time I've caught them doing that in Inside Number 9, and I thought that was not to tar. I do think Misdirection is one of the weaker episodes of that series, but not to tar the whole series with that brush. But I think that's starting to creep in for me.
Yeah. Do you think maybe it is that idea that there's going to be a reveal, there's going to be a twist, there's going to be a constraint. It's going to be about betrayal or the backstage workings of the entertainment industry. Do you think there's an element that maybe we've had 5 series of that now, and we are all very TV literate, and maybe the downside of that is we're less surprisable perhaps by what they're doing?
I think there's a bit of that, yeah, and I think there is just that, they probably, if they want to keep this going long term, they probably just need to be a little bit more on the guard about not quite going back to those same wells so much. Obviously you can't do that infinitely. No creator can do that infinitely, but and obviously there might be arguments to wrap Inside Number 9 up sooner rather than later to preserve it as a sort of unsullied gem. But there was another thing. You were mentioning the what's it called? The episode with the all the monologues.
Thinking Out Loud. Yeah.
Yeah, we definitely don't have time to get into my mixed feelings about Alan Bennett as a Northerner. but I say that with all due respect, obviously, because I'm scared. I'm physically intimidated by Alan Bennett, so by the octogenarian Alan Bennett. But obviously, as you pointed out in messaging, that is such a love letter to Talking Heads in a lot of ways, with their own twist on it, obviously. But it's such a love letter to Talking Heads that I was almost like, I think this is almost a step too far. This is almost just like it's almost crossing over from love letter into just not plagiarism. Obviously, that's a serious accusation, but it's not doing it for me as much.
Yeah, I mean it's there writ large, isn't it? And it's there kind of in the first time Maxine Peake turns to the camera with a northern accent. You're going like, hello, Alan, how are you doing? Yeah. But I think again they do play with that. I think they do twist that. The fact that the conceit is that actually there is only one person, there is only one talking head, really, who's actually there.
That's quite clever. You're almost condensing a series of talking heads into one episode.
Yeah, I mean actually there's 2 because the who turns out to be the father who is killed is real as well. Yeah, and then the rest of them are standing around here. So I think that's interesting enough, and I think that's definitely there. There's other bits in there that don't quite gel for me in that episode as well. But I think what's interesting, I've just been looking up. It was actually Steve Pemberton that directed that episode. I don't know if that's the first time he's directed an episode, but it's Pemberton himself who's directed it, which I don't really have anything to say about, but I think it's interesting that they've written and directed this themselves. Again, I think they both give very strong performances in it. I think Reece Shearsmith in particular is very bittersweet and quite touching.
Yeah, that's not something you see him do a lot, really, is it go down that kind of well of like non-creepy heartbreak, kind of non.
Yeah, absolutely. I think I was tempted to throw that into the mix, but I rewatched it last night and actually thought I have too many problems with it. I think to make a compelling case for it being in my top 4. Yeah. But I would say as well, having watched, I rewatched The Referee's a Wanker and Love's Great Adventure last night, and I think they're both fantastic. I think they're both really, really wonderful. Like as I said to you, there's something very Pinteresque about the referee episode, which is, you know, a kind of tussle of masculinity in a very controlled environment where everyone's locked into one room and there's just tension between, you know, all these men who are having a massive pissing contest, and the stakes are clearly very high.
Yeah. Well, the moment, you know, we talk about turning points mid episode. The moment when David Morrissey just asks very quietly, "Can I kiss you?" Of the beautiful young footballer. You know, that's quite the moment, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. It's a massive turn, and then obviously the reveal in that being that, you know, has he been playing a part his entire life? His entire career was in order to get City promotion.
That's another one of those twists, a bit like the Devil of Christmas, that you probably don't want to think about too much.
Yeah, realistically, yeah, absolutely.
But it's very funny in the moment.
Yeah, it is, and there's some great stuff in that. Again, I think one of the jokes of the entire thing might be when they're joking about Ralph Little wearing eyeliner. And saying that there was a 1 minute silence and they saw him, you could see the mascara running down his face, and they called him Linesman Minnelli, which I think is just, I mean, sometimes you have to wonder if they came up with a joke first and they just retrofitted everything around it, because if you've come up with the joke Linesman Minnelli, it's like, okay, how do we get this into a show, and how do we make it make sense?
When lockdown's over, John, can we use that as a pub quiz name?
Linesman Minnelli, absolutely. Yeah,
good. I just wanted to, you know, we'll wrap up because this is obviously a long podcast, even for the EscapeGoat. But I just wanted to say, you know, because I think we'll probably have you back, John, when Series 6 comes out. You know, God knows when that'll be, and I'll be interested to see what they make out of lockdown, because I'm sure they'll do at least one episode that has that as a focus. Or they may not, who knows. But I just wanted to, it's kind of a fun question to end on, really. Do you have any, like, almost like if you were the fantasy hire for, like, a guest writer on Inside Number 9, do you have, like, because this is such a good show for this, isn't it? You know, this is endless pub conversation about this kind of thing. Do you have, like, a draft, you know, in your head, like a setting, a kind of, you know, an elevator pitch for an Inside Number 9 episode?
Yeah, I mean, there's all sorts of things I'd probably like to see them tackle. Interestingly, actually, when we were on the break there, I kind of caught us both as we were coming back, like homing into view on the Zoom call, and just thought, oh, that is a bit inside number, because they've used surveillance cameras quite a lot as well to give them that different angle. And part of me thinks, of course they'll do that. Of course they'll do something with, you know, Zoom and video conferencing. And then a part of me thinks they probably won't. It's, I don't know. Maybe that's a bit too obvious. Maybe that's maybe there's not much that you can do with that, and maybe that's also not something we particularly want to see, because we've been through it, for God's sake. I think I said to you that there'd be a really interesting one, maybe with a music studio. If there was a band, perhaps a kind of old psychedelic band, a kind of Pink Floyd-esque band where Syd Barrett turns up during the recording of "Shine On You Crazy Diamond," and something like that, where you could have that.
Well, echoes of Bernie Clifton there as well, actually.
Yeah, absolutely. Where you could have it's about the dynamics, isn't it? I think that would be an interesting dynamic. For them to explore a music one, more like I think the way that they handled football in The Referee's a Wanker was actually really interesting, and I wonder if there's more sports themed ones that perhaps you could go with. I think there might be lots of interesting factors in other, you know, either incredibly high profile or incredibly niche sports and games. So I think maybe along those lines. And obviously my elevator pitch would be, well, it's set backstage in a TV studio. That's it. That's the end of the, that's the end of the pitch.
I like it.
You know what you're doing with that, boys. Off you go.
I've got two, and one's a bit more specific than the other, but one's I just realised that kind of their limited setting thing meant that they'd done all indoor stuff. And I'd actually thought you could do, if you define the setting as like a particular park, you could do an outdoor one. And that would be an interesting, like obviously you could do anything you wanted with that in terms of human experience, but just the fact of it having been this limited situation, maybe you could do a one-shot thing, for example, round a walk around a park. But just you could, if you define the setting as any given area, which obviously they do, I'd like to see them play with outdoor settings more. And my other one was, I think I told you about this in the pub, but it was just after I watched the first season, I had the thought of like, what could you do that's about number 9 addresses, and as a politics geek, I instantly hit on what is in the building next to number 10 Downing Street. And I've got this, semi-thought out, coherent idea about, a Theresa May-esque Prime Minister who's on her way out, who discovers that there's when she goes outside to do press conferences, there's a door on the other side of the street that only she can see, that some figure emerges from, like, sort of beckoning her in, and you find out that there's this kind of occult, maybe like Hereditary-esque kind of thing going on with Downing Street, where its occupant is an inevitable sacrifice to these dark forces, and it's a work in progress. But that's where I got with that.
Yeah, I mean that's a lovely idea. I think right now I'd rather watch the harrowing, to be honest. That would be of more comfort to me. would be to see some kind of emaciated demon trying to eat my face than it would be to look at the political situation.
Yeah, mischief for PM.
Yeah, exactly. I wonder as well that I think. So I'm thinking about the forms of transport they've used as well. So obviously they've used a train in La Couchette, and they're sat in a stationary car in the stakeout. I don't think they've done anything in a plane or a helicopter or anything like that.
Cable car.
Oh, cable car, perfect. But something like that, where that constraint kind of gives you the ability to up the stakes, to turn up the temperature on whatever the situation is.
Yeah, no, I agree. Well, we'll get you back when Series 6 emerges, and possibly before that.
Fabulous. And in reality as well, I think, just to end on quite a positive note, obviously we're both talking about this because we're big fans of it and think it's lovely work. But also, there's not that much, particularly in the current television landscape, I would say, with a lot of either long-form drama or a lot of, endless syndicated comedies that just go on forever and ever and ever. There's not much out there that I will sit down and go, I need to see that again, and it will give me something else this time. It will give me something radically different to what I got from it the first time. I'm not just hearing the same joke repeated. I'm having a completely different reaction to the work of art, and I think that's actually what elevates what they're doing above a lot of other television. I just think it's I think it's a very striking, inventive work of art. Yeah.
No arguments here. Highlight of TV for the last decade for me. Well, I've really enjoyed chatting to you about that, John. That was good, and thanks for joining me. And as I say, that will be, obviously we'll trim it down a bit, but that will be a fairly long podcast even for my standards. But that's good because I like long podcasts. So
fair enough.
Yeah, no, much appreciated.
Well, no, I mean, obviously your next mission is to make this podcast about Inside Number 9 as much like an episode of Inside Number 9 as you possibly can.
Yes, so this is the point at which I have, this spectre appears behind me, and, you realise that this whole thing's been a conceptual setup. I thought you were going to arrange for yourself to be decapitated midway through the episode or something, and then I'd only realise, weeks later after having gone to the police and counselling and everything, that, this was actually... I
gag, I tried. I was going to do that, but as you know, it's really hard to get someone round at the moment. So
up to and including executioners. No. I'm glad you didn't try. Well, thanks for joining us, everyone, and we'll see you next time. Thank you.
Fantastic. Bye.
You've been listening to the EscapeGoat podcast, hosted by David Fagiani. If you want to contact the podcast with any feedback or thoughts, you can leave comments on our Libsyn page or under our YouTube videos, or email us at escapegoatpod@gmail.com. You can also reach the show on Twitter on @egoat_pod and follow us for new episode notifications, or get me personally on @d_Fagiani. This podcast is available on YouTube, Apple Podcasts and Spotify, as well as our Libsyn site, escapegoatpodcast.libsyn.com. Original intro, outro, and any other incidental music for this podcast is composed, produced, and made available by permission of Richard Gilbert.